See in here. I miss you in here. iPad is not working today as well as it did the other day. So, is this for the live chat? Is there any guys sitting on it, or? We can hear it. Hello?
All right, we're live. It's 12 noon on the East Coast. I'm Al Tompkins with the Poynter Institute, and this is a live Google Hangout. We call it Race for the Truth. We're going to be spending the next 3 hours looking at the way that media have covered, various media, lots of media have covered the Boston bombing case and what we can be learning from that. In the first hour, I'm going to be joined by Sean Kelly, a reporter from Boston's WCVB. He's been reporting almost nonstop since the bombing occurred. We'll be joined in a little while, we hope, by Ali Velshi, a former CNN anchor who is the new anchor of Al Jazeera America. And then Aaron Brown. We're very happy that he's going to join us right now from Arizona State University. He is a professor. He's a former CNN anchor. A lot of people will know Aaron from that fateful day of 9/11 when he was the main anchor for CNN. So he is a professor now out at Arizona State University. Guys, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Hey, Sean, you've been reporting almost nonstop since all of this started. Start by describing very quickly where you are and how it is that you came by this story right from the top.
Well, where I'm sitting right now happens to be a block away from where the second bomb went off on Boylston Street. It just happens to be the neighborhood where I live. I started on Monday morning. In fact, my first tweet of the day was about the bomb sweep and watching them finish the bomb sweep. Unfortunately, that was hours before the bombers even arrived at that location. I covered the marathon as we do every year. It was a great day. I was maybe a block and a half, which in Boston terms is probably about 100 to 150 yards away, in a live truck, going through some video when the first bomb went off. I saw the huge black plume of smoke rise out of Boylston Street. I had a crew with me. We immediately started gathering our gear. I was told that I yelled, "That's a bomb." I don't remember that myself, but we grabbed the gear, and the second bomb went off 10 seconds later. We ran in, and the very first person I saw was the person you've seen a lot of, the man who was in a wheelchair being wheeled by a guy in a cowboy hat. Both of his limbs had been blown off. I covered the story that day. We went through the process of the week. Thursday night, I went to MIT to cover the officer who was shot. In the midst of that, we found ourselves in the chase for at the time we weren't sure, but it was rumored to be the two bombers. Wound up in Watertown, kind of got caught in the mix and found ourselves about 30 to 50 feet away from the shootout that was occurring and the bombs that were being thrown. And then through the course of the night, we continued to cover it from Watertown. We heard over the radio scanners that there was blood found in a boat and a possible body. We raced to the scene, and then I found myself probably about 50 yards away from the second shootout in Watertown where they actually captured the suspect.
By the way, for those joining us, hashtag Race for Truth on Twitter, and you can ask questions, and we'll pass them along to our guests. We're going to be going on all morning, all afternoon long. For those of you on the West Coast, it'll be morning. And we're going to, in the second hour, be talking with two Pulitzer Prize-winning photographers and an eyewitness, a person who actually ran in the marathon, and an eyewitness to the scene. In our third hour, from 2 to 3 Eastern Time, we'll be joined by Eric Martin, the general manager of Reddit, who a couple of days ago apologized for what they called the online witch hunt. Monica Guzman, who is probably one of the most connected online people we know from the Seattle Times, and Drew Curtis from FARC is going to join us. So quite an afternoon. What was the first thing that you reported, Sean, after you witnessed those, what you call bombs? I guess you initially called it explosions.
Right, and I was very careful with my terminology that morning because we didn't know with any certainty that it was a bomb. So I think the very first thing that I reported, which was in part my way of notifying my newsroom, was 2 loud explosions near the finish line, something along those lines.
And how did you file that, Sean? Did you file that on the air, or where was your first obligation?
With this, I filed it with I pulled out my cell phone and I typed it onto Twitter because in these days I know that the producer pod and where all the managers are sitting, the likelihood of them seeing a tweet is probably better than them seeing an actual email. And I also knew that there was so much commotion at that time that I didn't think a phone call was right.
So for you, the first thing that you did, the first reporting that you did as a television reporter, was to put it on Twitter.
Very first, yep.
And did that have to go through anybody? Did anybody have to approve that posting for you to do that?
No, and I don't know if there'll be any. In hindsight, I don't know what my managers will say about that. But I felt like I've done this long enough where they weren't going to be concerned. Had I started typing that bombs are blowing up, they probably would have already have pulled me into an office and said that was not okay. But fortunately, I chose my words wisely. But like I said, a lot of that was I wasn't completely thinking of the audience so much as I was my newsroom had to be aware that something major was happening and we needed to react quickly.
Aaron Brown, on the network level, Aaron, how does that information flow differently through the network? Would anybody be able to tweet straight?
First of all, can I go back to a couple things that Sean said? And let me just, the lead from my perspective on all of this is that Boston media did great.
Yes.
I Lord knows didn't see all of it, saw bits and pieces as the network would cut in and out, read a lot of the Globe, all sorts of things that went on. I thought on balance you guys were fabulous. Okay, so please take everything else with that. I find it breathtaking, honestly, that this is where we are, that quite correctly, I guess, I want to think about it, that Sean's way to communicate with his editors. This is how old I am. I believe in editors and chains of command and that we need people involved in decision making, all of that. But he felt the most efficient way to communicate with his editors, his bosses, the people responsible for what the television station did that day, was to communicate in the most contemporary public way possible. Does that, as someone who, I spent most of 35 years as a reporter. I want to report, and I think like a reporter. However, I spent the last 7 years as an editor and the managing editor for a broadcast, and the editor in me goes, can we talk about this? And it just speaks to how dramatically the world has changed in a sense. I mean, I used to say to my newspaper friends when they were dealing with the internet, welcome to my world. I've been dealing with instant news coverage and sausage being made on the air, live, for much of my life. Now you guys get to do it, and perhaps it will make you a little bit more understanding of
Sean, respond to that, what you just heard.
Pardon?
Well, I mean, I think my response to that would be this. I'm standing there as a reporter. I hear 2 explosions go off. There's no doubting that. And so what's the other option? Call the newsroom, run the risk of getting an intern answering the phone who doesn't know who to put me through to. There's commotion everywhere. And I mean, how much of a discussion are we going to really have about?
And what were you actually seeing at the moment that you tweeted? It's not like you weren't on the scene. I mean, you were actually seeing people bleeding and people who were injured.
I had smoke in my face. I had police officers running in one direction, wheelchairs with people without limbs running in the other. There was no question about it.
So even if it had been an air conditioner that blew up, it would still be news by anybody's standards. You saw injuries.
Exactly. And we were very clear on the air. You know, I had 3 initial tweets. One was that 2 explosions had occurred, another that police were running to the scene, and then a third that people were coming out without limbs. From that point on, from a Twitter standpoint, we kind of took a step back because at that point we were then on the air, so we were making phone calls and describing it, and I was very clear to say repeatedly, we don't know what this is yet. In fact, when we were running in, there were marathon runners running out who were telling us it was just electrical. They're telling us it was just electrical. Now, I may have assumed, which I did, that there were 2 bombs and there was no way it was something electrical, but I didn't know that with any certainty. There were generators in the area. We're sure it could have been that, so I was careful.
So Aaron,
first of all, wait, can I just let me just I feel like respectfully, first of all, Sean, I'm not being critical at all. I suspect if I understood Twitter and all that stuff, I'd have done the same thing. I mean, if that's how my editors, if that's the most efficient way to get to my editors, that's the most efficient way to get to my editors. That's just a kind of, you know your editors, you know their habits, you know the likelihood that your phone call is, you know all that. I don't second guess that at all. What I do is marvel at and find somewhat, just as a 64-year-old, honestly, it's somewhat breathtaking that the way we now communicate with our editors is public.
But Sean, you
it's not
didn't
just
say
like
anything.
before our editors and producers saw that tweet. All the people who follow you, and I don't really understand all this, but all the people who follow you were also getting that for the first time. And you, by the way, don't know, I mean, or I don't know, you may know, I don't see how you could know, what other tweeting was going on, what other things were being said. There's no context really for where you are. It's just, to me, it's that one of the things the internet has done is eliminated the whole gatekeeper function of what we do, and this just seemed to be that squared.
Okay, I want to test that just for a second. Sean, is the gatekeeper function compromised in some way or another? Is after you've gone live from the beginning, then what happens? You started the ball rolling, you've started to go live, it's clear you're going to go live, how does information come to you and then get on the air from that point forward?
From that point forward, in many ways, since I'm the person at the scene, I'm dealing with a handful of things. The logistics of television, getting on TV to show people what we are seeing ourselves. But in terms of the information flow, which is I think what you're asking, a lot of it is just play-by-play, where the anchor is there and the anchor is saying, Sean, what are you seeing at this moment? And I'm able to communicate. We're standing next to police officers who are now moving us another 50 yards back. The crime scene is officially moving another 50 yards back. Then the next question, what kinds of injuries are you seeing? It was simple for me to turn and look toward the finish line and look at the people coming past me to know these are lower extremities is what we were seeing mostly. So then that's an easy report that did not require the phone call. Just in a context point of view, as we progressed through the week, that's when a lot more phone calls were being made to managers where it was, here's what we're hearing. I've got a couple people who are saying that there may be somebody in custody right now. And then other phone calls I know were coming in from the courthouse. Hey, listen, some federal court workers are saying that they're preparing a courtroom for something major. What do you want to do with this? And then the manager decides, okay, we're going to bring you back on the air. We're prepared to report that, but limit the information to what we're being told is this. So
Who were the major sources of information? I mean, as closely as you can characterize them, especially around this information of a suspect, somebody has been arrested.
Well, I think that in itself, I'm curious to see how that fleshes itself out in time. But without giving out specific names, because I think I need to be careful about that. I think that there were high-level people that were speaking to reporters who are typically in the know on everything.
Now, was this were they some place and reporters were talking with them under some condition that they weren't going to name them?
There were phone calls being made to these people directly.
And is it your suspicion, Sean, that pretty much everybody was talking to pretty much the same people?
For the most part, I can think of about 3 to 5 people who were doing a lot of the talking behind the scenes.
Why couldn't they be named?
Because they were not willing to. They were not given permission by the FBI or others to give out information.
And these, there has been some suspicion, and I don't know whether you can tell us anything about it, but there's been some suspicion that a fair amount of this information comes from politicians, people who are getting high-level briefings. To what extent did the politicians play into the information source?
That's exactly correct. 100% correct. There were politicians involved who we know for a fact were involved in high-level meetings. I'll be curious to see when the rest of this is written about how journalists handled this. I'll be curious to see what we find out about the actual day that CNN reported that an arrest had been made, and others did as well. Because I've heard from numerous sources in law enforcement, from different law enforcement agencies, that it was widely known that the courthouse was getting ready for someone, and there was reporting being done behind the scenes that perhaps someone was in custody. And I just had someone in law enforcement come up to me last night and who said, keep track of this, because we may still find out that someone was in custody and that the FBI got it wrong, which opens up a whole new discussion that, did somebody leak that somebody had somebody in custody and the FBI was wrong, and the FBI isn't willing to say anything about that.
What harm comes, Aaron, from reporting that somebody was arrested and then somebody, apparently wasn't arrested? I mean, look, we're watching live coverage just as we watched you on 9/11. We know that this is rolling coverage and that the truth's going to change as we go along. So what's the big deal? Don't we all get that?
I don't know if we all get that. To be honest, if I thought we all got it, I would have. I think I would have handled it differently. I tried to remind people a lot, in whether it was 9/11 or the sniper or any of the other kind of big rolling coverage things that I anchored in my life. The first attack in the World Trade Center in '93, I did for ABC. I tried to remind them the first reporting of these events is often very chaotic, and keep that in mind. But the question of harm is like there's the micro harm and the macro harm. The micro harm is if somehow that person is identified. That's a harm. That's like a big harm to me. If someone says Aaron Brown is in custody, Aaron Brown's a little upset. Aaron Brown's family's not too thrilled. So that would be a big harm. More broadly, I think for the news organization, and I mean for CNN, and oddly, if I just as an aside, think that CNN has more. The CNN brand has more on the line than, for example, the Fox brand in this sort of thing. So CNN takes a bigger hit. Is that your connection to the audience is hurt? Is it destroyed? Probably not. I mean, I don't see that, but it's hurt. And your relationship with the audience, whether it's John's, I think as Sean knows, John's a killer reporter. He's a really, really good reporter.
You're talking about John King.
John King. I mean, if I told another interviewer, if John had come to me with that story, I wouldn't even. Would I have thought this might go south on us? Yeah. I mean, they all could go.
And Sean is telling us today that may well turn out to be that information may well turn out to be true.
Well, look,
I believe him as a reporter.
I mean, if we're keeping score, they were wrong, and so we know that to be the
Totally.
We know that to be the case. But why were they wrong? I think is the interesting discussion that we'll have down the road about were they. I think we'll perhaps learn to appreciate more why they went with that story.
Well, just I tell you what my view on this, and what I've told students about this, and what I told others, media critics about this, is. And Sean, I don't know that you've looked at everything you said, and I know that I've gone through stories where I looked at literally everything I reported, and sometimes you can do everything right in this business, and I mean everything right, and you talk to the right people, they give you information they believe to be true, you stop, take a breath, think about the quality of the sourcing, back up the sourcing, and that person ends up being wrong.
I want to remind all the people who are,
and it happens.
I want to remind all the people who are joining us that at 1 o'clock, we'll be joined by two Pulitzer Prize winning photographers. At 2 to 3, we'll be joined by the general manager of Reddit and Drew Curtis from FARC, who will be talking about the influences of social media on this story. Sean, if you guys slow down, if you start couching everything in very slow terms, social media will eat you alive. True?
Absolutely. The night of the Watertown shootout, I'm in the midst of ducking in a car, and I can hear my phone going off, and I can then see, not long after that, see Twitter messages coming in demanding to know why I wasn't reporting any number of things about who these suspects were. And keep in mind, this was a night where at one point we were told, I had my hands up for a police officer pointing a gun at me. And so you get the demands on Twitter are just incredible to keep up. And then you can have managers calling saying, hey, we're hearing this, is it true? And the race to get the accurate information is so difficult. And I can remember seeing the spokeswoman for the Boston PD walk up, and I sprinted over to her to try to figure out, are these the terrorists? And she just put her hands up in this air and said, whoa, we don't know. We just went through a gunfight. We don't know yet. They thought that. They weren't willing to go there. And it was interesting, too. The spokesperson for state police at one point said, we have 2 suspects accounted for. Well, they did, but it turns out one of them was wrong. One suspect was not the bomber. So it went from 2 to 1, just like that, and these were official people telling us this. And so, you know, calling it as you're seeing it becomes, when you look back, Aaron, Aaron, I'm a little bit afraid to look back at some of the things that we reported that didn't come out to be the way it actually was.
One of the things that happened while you were out there on the scene was there was a report from a police scanner, not from a journalist initially, but from somebody who was on Twitter. And they heard the name Sunil Tripathi, who the name was on the police scanner. For those of you who are just sort of joining in the news flow of the day, this was the Brown University student who had been missing since the middle of March, and today the medical examiner's office does confirm that it was his body who was found in Providence, Rhode Island. So sad news becomes even worse, but he was falsely identified. I guess originally, Sean, on a police scanner. You must have heard this.
I actually did not. That, from what I was told, that name came out at a point where we were so close to the position of the shootout, excuse me, that we eventually had to have a police escort to move our car out of there, in part because there were concerns about whether we were in the crime scene area, but secondly because there were so many explosives around. So there was a brief period where we could not listen to the scanners in our kind of negotiations with police to get out of this scene. But I immediately saw it on Twitter, and then I was people were messaging me about it, and I'll have to tell you, I was looking at the picture and I thought, wow, there is a major similarity here. But getting back to our original discussion, there's no way we would have put that out there.
Why not?
Multiple discussions were being had with managers.
Why not?
Well, because scanner traffic is all over the place. You know, there's a lot that's said on scanners that winds up not being true. There was an original report on the scanner that there were calls, we got him, and there were police all around me in Watertown saying, we got him, it's over. And it wasn't true. So you can't just go on what they say on the scanners. It certainly kind of guides you in the direction of where police may be thinking. But I absolutely would not feel comfortable going that with myself because of the point we were talking about earlier. If you're wrong, you're way wrong. I just can't even imagine being those kids who were on the New York Post. I
just wish that more viewers could hear your story. So here you are watching a gunfight, an actual gunfight. Bombs are going off, so there's smoke in the air. You can report that there's a gunfight. They're saying, we've got him, and you have a break in your head that you're tapping saying, we can't say, we've got him. You can't report, they say they've got him.
Right, I mean...
Yeah, but you can report, I mean, first of all, I am grateful that I didn't live in a world where I had to worry about what Twitter was saying. Honestly, it was bad enough to worry about what AP was reporting. And having editors say, you know, AP is saying blah, 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 let alone, you know, some guy in Cambridge is saying blah, blah, blah. You can report the chaos. You can report broadly that the crosstalk on the radio is nuts right now, that all sorts of things are being said, and I would absolutely report that. I wouldn't be uncomfortable reporting that, and I would try, because what Sean is trying to do, I don't mean to speak for you, but I know your work well enough to know that you're trying to create a sense of experience for viewers. You're trying to put them in that moment, and part of putting them in that moment, feeling what it's like to be in Watertown in the middle of that shootout, is to say, the scanner traffic is insane right now. Some cops are saying, we got him. Others are saying, duck. Others are saying, move back. It's hard to sort anything out except to say that at this moment, chaos rules. That's a great thing for viewers to know. That's a wonderful piece of information to have, and I wouldn't hesitate to put that on there.
Aaron, draw on your experience even from 9/11. isn't part of the problem when you are on the air for hour upon hour upon hour, those initial hours, lots of information comes in, there's lots going on. And then in hour 6 and 8 and 9 and 12 and 31,
Yes.
that's when the problems start, yes?
Well, think about that. So I just did for my students the last couple of days. I've been going over an hour of 9/11, the 10 o'clock Eastern hour. A lot of things happen. One tower falls. Lots of things happen. I'm not sure I agree with that, Al. I think that you can have. We put on a lot of people in hour 31 or hour 12 or hour 9, but you're putting on the prime minister. Honestly, in that situation, you're putting on the prime minister of Israel. That's a little different, and we put on a lot of people who, it seems to me, in those hours who had gotten out of the building, and we were very interested. I was very interested in the stories of people who got out, what they saw. I was very interested in people who were rushing in. In that time, we were very interested in. Now I say this, and I say this like I was thinking that way. That's not really honestly true. Is creating the experience for people. What was it like to be in that tower when people were trying to get out? What was it like to be a fireman down on the scene? What was it like to be? What is it like to be? I mean, that's what television does. I think I'm more struck by how much misreporting, honestly, big and small, goes on as the event plays out. We had, fire at the State Department. There was no fire at the State Department. We had all sorts of things that very smart, careful people were told, but were not true. Even if you look at this story, not even. I mean, this was a big story. Today, I'm reading actually last night, I'm reading the New York Times. It turns out what Sean referred to as the second shootout, it seems like it was a one-way event because there was no gun the other dude had. So
you witnessed that, didn't you, Sean? You were actually there?
A week later, let me finish the idea.
I'm sorry, yeah, Aaron.
Things a week later are still unclear in a lot of respects. That was a shootout on Friday night. It's not a shootout now. It was a shoot.
So we're being told right now. Sean, you were there. What did you see?
Well, the first thing we saw, we were entering into the neighborhood, and we heard on the police scanners they're throwing grenades at us. So the first thing I did was open the window to see if I could hear the explosions. And as I'm opening the window, not only could you hear the explosion, you could smell the smoke coming in. We kind of got into this cavalry of police cars that brought us within about 50 feet of the area. We could see police turning down what's Laurel Street, which is where the two bombers were positioned. They were turning down that street. It looked like they were all pointing their guns. To this day, I couldn't say if I could actually see them firing their weapons in that direction, but I could hear it was like fireworks, and the amount of bombs that were going off were incredibly loud, shaking the car. But it was to a point where the police were ducking down, and so we ducked down because we felt like we needed to take cover because of our position. Mm-hmm. When I got up from the dashboard and looked again, the police officers are facing in another direction, and it appeared that they were shooting in that direction. So in my mind, I'm thinking that the original shootout is happening one way, and then I learned later in the week that the original shooting was in the opposite way, and that's where the actual bombs were. And I've since seen witness pictures where you only see the older brother standing in the middle of the road with his left hand up.
Yeah, I saw those photos are being pretty widely circulated today by somebody who must have been in a condo or an apartment or something sort of above the scene up there. Now, were you also a witness to the shooting at the boat?
I couldn't see the shooting. We pulled into a street that was just kind of perpendicular to where this occurred, so we didn't have an actual view of it. But I can tell you from when we pulled up, what we were hearing on the police scanners was that they were setting up a perimeter. which is not it's not a slow process, but it's not as aggressive as it would be if they were actually moving in. And what we were hearing them say was, don't do anything until SWAT arrives. So when we got there, we saw canines, troopers, long guns everywhere setting up, but it wasn't, didn't appear to be ready to move in. And as we were getting out of the car, that's when we heard a lot of gunfire. And you could see it on the looks on the troopers. They were startled. They all ran in one direction, and they were yelling at us for us to get down. And at that moment, we thought that the bomber was on the run toward us, just based on the direction.
And what were you reporting at that time? And how were you reporting it? I'll come to you in a second, Aaron.
The best I can remember, we were just saying that there was an area surrounded by police. There was gunfire, and we didn't. And I think I reported that we didn't know if there was gunfire coming from the boat, but we were reporting that the police who were around us were around a boat where they had gotten a report that there was blood and a possible person inside.
And how did you know that?
I knew that from standing next to a bunch of police officers, and this gets back to Aaron's point. We were listening to the radio traffic, and then we were standing next to police officers who were hearing the same thing we were hearing, got in their cars, and went. So we were careful on, not to say this is it, this is the suspect. We went back to what Aaron was saying, where we were discussing, here's what's happening right now, and here's what police are being told.
Aaron?
The only point I was trying to make in this is, here we are, we are a week later, 6 days later, and a significant fact seems by lots of people. I mean, the Times piece that I read, and this may have been widely reported in Boston. I haven't done the papers yet today. I've just been talking to you. Is that they're trying to figure out who gave the initial order to shoot. There was a commander who gave a ceasefire order. They're trying to put pieces together, and the challenge for the Seans of the world and the dangers for the Aarons of the world who are asked to be critical of the Seans of the world, whether they want to or not, is that this stuff is, a week later we don't know. A week later, we now believe it was a one-way shootout. That's what we believe today. The Times reporting was really solid, I thought, or seemed really solid to me. And when we are asking reporters to do this in real time, I think it's imperative that we at least give viewers a kind of broad sense of the chaos that information, of the chaos of the information flow, if that makes sense.
Hey, Sean, let me ask you.
That's happening. That's terrific. I think too often it does not happen.
I think you're right, Aaron. We don't pull back the curtain enough to say how we know what we know and what we don't know. So, Sean, let's move forward a little bit to now we've got these reports from a hospital, and almost, I don't want to overstate it, but it seems like every two, 3 times a day we get another sentence or two from the bedside that appears to add more information, more understanding. Where's that information coming from, to the extent that you can tell us?
To the extent that I can tell you, some of it is just being passed along through the general chain of this joint terrorism task force that they have here, where there are numerous people who meet on this, and some of the information is filtered down. I mean, I'll be honest, we have some people who are getting, at this point, better information from the hospital than I am. But one thing I think is interesting is that there are stories now that are being told. For example, the shootout story. It'll be reported on one day, and then a couple days later, I'll see a breaking news headline, and it'll be the same story, just kind of told a little bit differently. So, my station reported that there was only one weapon recovered in Watertown that appeared to be used by the 2 suspects. So, the reporting was that there was one gun, 2 shootouts, 1 gun. and then all of a sudden, a day or two later, it's breaking news. Second suspect unarmed at the boat. Well, didn't we already just say that there was only one gun and it was not at the boat? So
these developments aren't much of a development, is what I hear you say.
some of them are reworded developments.
Isn't this what happens when we stay in Boston for another 10 days and we keep going? We keep looking for the one more little development.
Right.
Maybe it's time to move on.
I think the part that worries me now is now we're heading into the territory, and there was a little bit of this early on, but we're heading into the territory of getting more people saying that they have been told information, and so you start to really question, well, have you? Were you in the meeting? Were you sitting with the FBI special agent in charge? Is that where you got this from? Or did you hear it from so-and-so who heard it from so-and-so? And I'm not saying...
how many conspiracy theories have come your way? I mean, you're down beating the street every day. These must be just flowing out of the woodwork for you.
The one that got me yesterday was the amount of people responding to the news that the suspect's mother and father were going to be coming back from Russia, and that they were going to be escorted into the hospital room. Where on earth does this come from? I have no idea. But I then spent part of my day dealing with U.S. Marshal sources who thought I was crazy for even asking that. But then the response to that was, well, if Michelle Obama can visit him, well, wait a second. Now the First Lady got to visit him? Where does that? I don't even know where this stuff comes from.
I visited him. I was there yesterday. He confessed.
You have breaking news for us?
He did the Lindbergh
Was he
kidnapping.
speaking or just drawing for you?
Well, it was. I'm pretty sure it was the Lindbergh kidnapping. Maybe it wasn't. But I reported it as breaking news. One of the things about this that I find that in talking to students, there are the mother coming to visit. I think is a perfect example of this. I assume the appetite in Boston for every detail, large or small, is insatiable. I completely understand that. It's my city, and every detail, your audience who's coming to you. There's a weird one-story mentality that happens in cable, and I think Boston TV is experiencing this now, that you can't leave that story. That audience in that moment is there for that story. That's the reason they're there. And so the example I normally use is, I don't know if you remember Terry Schiavo, the woman in Florida who was taken off life support. And for a week, there was this circus down there, and nothing new happened. Okay, it was the same stuff every hour, and yet every hour we did exactly the same thing because your audience wants every detail all the time, and God help you if you leave it. And I think that's where Boston, sadly, I mean, I think that's where this story is. Everything is breaking news because there has to be a lower third in life. It's like the 11th commandment. There needs to, every television screen has to have breaking news on it.
Sean, let me ask you a quick question. What are your standards in your newsroom? We got a question from one of our Twitter followers who used the hashtag #RaceForTruth. And what are your standards in your newsroom for the use of anonymous sources?
We're willing to use anonymous sources. My experience has always been for the most part, a two-source. You have to come to our managers with two sources. I've had experiences, certainly in this story, where it's one source, you run it by a manager who, in many cases, wants to know, well, who are we talking about here? And so that's how the information flows that way.
Hearst and WCBB especially are quite well known for your ethical standards, and it's not just something you talk about. When you talk to your managers, do you have to reveal your source?
I don't always, but sometimes I'm willing to in an effort to move the discussion along. I don't like to play games with them and make them think that, you know, I don't want to get into a world where it's you got to trust me on this one. I got a guy. I don't want to go down that road. It's better for me, I think, to just tell them here's who I'm talking to, and here's where we're going with it.
Aaron, at the network level, how important are anonymous sources? I mean, to the legitimate gathering of news.
At the network TV level, somewhat important. I wouldn't say unimportant. I mean, there are certainly people in Washington who are dealing with the usual suspects of leaks for vengeance and leaks for purpose, and those people want to keep their name out of it. But I mean, we are a business also that puts people on television, and so I think generally it's not quite as big a deal. And this kind of story, obviously, it's a huge deal. It was funny when Sean was talking, you know, I want to have two sources, but sometimes, and my general thinking was, I want to have two sources unless it's really damn good, and then I'm going to make the argument that my source is so solid that I can, you know, I'll take the hit on this. I absolutely had editors who wanted to know who the source was, and I do feel this is a tricky area as an editor. I felt I had the right to know. This is an employee of mine. You know, the weird thing about being the anchor is, it's also the wonderful thing in times about being the anchor, is that you're going to get a lot of the, you're going to get the credit, and you're going to get the blame, and I just want some. You know, I was happy to say, oh no, I didn't say that. That was Jennings who said that. But if it's my source, he has a right to know. He had a right to know where that was coming from, and I kind of feel like the editors have that right to know. It's uncomfortable, but I think Sean characterized it exactly right. You don't want to get on the road of, you got to trust me on this one. I got a guy. It's just a tough road.
That's a source calling you right there, Sean. Let me ask you something.
Al, can I just make one point before the question? I don't want to underestimate the pressures of a chaotic story like this, in addition to the competitive nature of our business, coupled with all this online stuff now where it's just rumor after rumor, and all these people who think they're the smartest people in the world are driving home the information, and you're spending all this time trying to juggle the facts, trying to knock down rumors, and you're also trying to, I mean, you're running a TV station, so you can't spend forever analyzing these things, because ultimately you have a job to get this information out there, and you've got other stations who are going with it, and there is a temptation there, and you have to fight real hard, really hard, to not go with that temptation.
Are you surprised, Sean? Go ahead, Aaron. Yeah.
Somewhere there has to be a balance between these things. I mean, my heart's still thumping at the idea that a Twitter feed is moving me in a direction. Okay, now I'm not out there doing that, but there has to be some balance between the other guy is doing it. I mean, we are who we are. We are our TV station. Our audience we are CNN. Now, I remember there's a guy at ABC, Dick Wald, who I think Dick is legendary in the business. And
he's still around. He's at Columbia University now, yeah.
Yeah, teaches at Columbia. And when you were hired at ABC, Dick would say to you in that Dick Wald sort of way, it's taken us 20 years to build the reputation of ABC News. You can screw it up. That's not quite how Dick put it, but you can screw it up in a heartbeat. Don't. And I think it's really, I mean, look at what the kind of week that John King has had. And he did everything right. Look at the kind of week CNN's had. Everybody has been wrong at some point on this story. And it damages us, all of us who love our business. We can't eliminate them all. But we need to be careful that adrenaline does not drive coverage. Adrenaline is not a journalistic tool. And sometimes I used to feel in my reporting, in ABC and CNN's reporting, even going way back to the King TV days, when we were using film, that adrenaline becomes one of the journalistic tools, and it's not. It's just not.
Well, Sean, you're expected to break stories, though. I mean, you don't get a paycheck for being third every day.
Exactly. I think, too, though, in the circumstances we all just went through, I think there was I don't know that there was a formal meeting to set up some sort of integrated correspondence about what information we were getting from where. But what would happen was a piece of information would come up, and then a handful of people in the newsroom who had contacts and had kind of oversight of the editorial flow would get that information so that everyone could then contribute. Here's what I heard. And then another reporter would come in and say, well, I can back that with this reporter. And then a third person, well, I'm hearing this, though. And so then a manager would jump in and say, okay, we need to hold back then.
I'm sorry that we're not going to be apparently joined by Ali Belshi, but because I guess there's some sort of connection problem from where he is in California. But he wrote a really wonderful essay about coverage. And one of the things he said, Sean, is badly sourced news never starts out as totally wrong information. That's the difficult part of this, isn't it? That there seems to be a thread of truth even in bad information.
Right, and I go back to the day that the day that the news broke that that apparently a suspect had been arrested, or even that an arrest was imminent. The circumstances behind that all had everyone kind of zeroing in on that idea, especially the courthouse. I talked to a colleague of mine.
We saw a video of all those people outside.
Right. I said, describe it for me, and she's been there. This is a colleague of mine who's covered the Whitey Bulger case regularly since his arrest. And I said, compare it to Whitey Bulger, and she said it was far bigger than Whitey Bulger. Now, they're not bringing in some drug dealer and getting that kind of attention. And now, is that enough to break a story? Well, no, absolutely not. But that's the kind of thing that journalists were dealing with, where you're hearing there may have been an arrest. Well, okay, this piece seems to match that.
If you tweet or report something that turns out to be not totally accurate, is there a backlash for you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just, in this day and age, you get immediate feedback, and
from whom?
From at applesauce. I mean, any old handle is somebody's writing into you saying.
So you're constantly hearing from people, especially on Twitter, about your reporting.
Here's a good example of that. In the midst of right after the Watertown shootout, when all of the police officers and SWAT teams were moving in, we were giving a description of what was happening in Watertown. I'm talking bus loads of SWAT team members unloading and moving in. One count was 1,000 members of law enforcement in the neighborhood. At one point, journalists were told to drop to their knees and put their hands up, and there was a sniper on top of a Lexus dealership garage pointing down at us, and another officer telling us to stay down. And so we're tweeting about this, and people were writing in and I had no idea that this took place. Somebody in law enforcement, the Massachusetts State Police Twitter handle, put out, please stop broadcasting information about when we're going into homes, which is similar to, people have been doing this for years. If there's a hostage situation, you don't want to say, they're about to go through the door on the east side of the building. You just don't do that. This became difficult because we're trying to set the scene for people, and somehow on Twitter it became, you're telling the bomber exactly where the police are, and they're going to shoot the police. You're putting everyone's lives at risk. And
you had some standards about that you guys didn't do that. Did you show SWAT team members moving and where they were and so on?
We did on the level that there was a main road where they were entering the scene, where
Because people needed to know that they were going to get a knock on the door, I suppose. 7 out of 10 people in Boston, I think it was TV News Check reported yesterday, about 70% of Boston actually was watching TV during the last moments.
Look, and that's the public service part of this too, which I think is critical. I had friends of mine who live in Watertown who were texting me saying, there's a large Humvee-looking vehicle, and it looks like the Army is entering my neighborhood. What do I do? And so, we felt like we had an obligation to say to people, this is what's coming your way. This is what their plan is. They're going to knock on your door. Don't go anywhere. If you're being told to evacuate, they're telling us to tell you, don't go anywhere until they escort you out. So
Aaron, go ahead. There was some obligation. Go ahead.
There was some public obligation to let people know this is what's going to happen in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I would defend journalists, at least at my station, who were trying to give a description of that without saying, here's the precise address where they are about to enter into.
Aaron, I can't get the image out of my mind that Sean just described. A sniper on top of a building, looking down at them. They're being told to put their hands up in the air and get on their knees, and by the way, they're still tweeting. That's quite an image, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's why your mom wanted you to have inside work. On the other hand, as long as you don't get shot, it's a great story to tell your kids someday.
They'll be thrilled, I'm sure.
I just throw out to people watching, and this is an oddly self-select audience of people who care about media and care about news coverage and that sort of thing. Is that I'm struck from the get-go here about the whole Twitter thing, and you got some guy named Applesauce who's telling Sean, why are you doing this, or why are you doing that? And,
by the way, full apologies to Applesauce. I don't know who they are, but
or Peach,
I'm sure there must be somebody.
Right, Peach Marmalade. I mean, I don't actually. It doesn't matter to me. The point is that all this time, I don't know. I just sort of feel like, can we designate some 22-year-old kid to be in charge of keeping track of what people are saying on Twitter, and let Sean go about doing what he does, which is talk to sources, report the news, and not react to the blowing wind of people.
Well, but wait a minute, Sean.
The wind of people is not helpful here.
Sean, wait a minute. This is not to say that Twitter and social media were without value for you.
Absolutely. I loved having access to Twitter, in part because I was getting message from people who were very concerned, and they were saying, I live on this street, here's what I'm seeing, how concerned should I be at this point? So I could have some pretty direct access to it, and in fact, my station's website had a great many people who were watching our live stream who were not able to see our broadcast, but they were able to follow along. And sometimes there were connection problems where they couldn't see the broadcast on their mobile device or on their computer.
So Twitter for you became both an important way to disseminate information, but it also became a source for you. In what ways did social media provide information that helped you to cover the story?
I wouldn't say it wasn't a source in terms of getting. Well, let me go back. So if the Twitter handle was Boston Police, the FBI, Massachusetts State Police, then we could use it as a source because the police agencies were saying, please follow us on Twitter for updates. But in terms of the public notifying us about various things or rumors getting out there, it was interesting to check it just to see where the mindset was flowing.
We got about 3 minutes left. Aaron, I want to come to you for about a minute's worth of what you hope we have learned from covering this event and how we should be smarter, especially in evaluating sources in the weeks.
The we being journalists as opposed to the we being viewers?
Well, I think there's some of both, isn't there?
Okay, well, I mean, I think, let me start with viewers, and I think we have those of us whose job it was, which is the way I think of anchoring shows, connecting viewers and news organizations. I mean, we have an oddly middle role there. Need to just be reminding people that this thing is on the move. It is rolling like you can't believe. I mean, I've felt this so many times in my life. It's part of the reason why, God forgive me for saying it this way, it is fun to do this stuff, because it is so real and so raw, and it is so what you prepared your whole life to do. I think the more transparent you are, the more you pull back the curtain, the more you draw people in, the more people have an equity understanding of the good things that happen and the bad things that happen. Journalism, my lesson is, I think that journalism by and large has been great. I have been so impressed with the Boston papers, so impressed with Boston TV. I just, it's not, if you're on TV that long, you're going to say something stupid. That is just a law of physics, man. You do 17 hours straight to TV, there's a moment where you're dumb. You can count on it. But on balance, I think reporters have learned to be wary of social media. It can be helpful, but it can bite you ugly. And I would, if I were running a newsroom right now, when we sat down and did the kind of after-action report, I would say, let's make sure that we have, I love the idea that there was a system in place in Sean's newsroom to bounce information off everyone to decide whether, now the truth is that you can do that the second day. But
Sean,
when it's happening, you can't do that.
Sean, in the last minute or less that we've got, what have you learned that you would like for other journalists especially to not have to learn about covering a huge unfolding story like this?
Gosh, I think it's just the importance of staying calm in the moment and knowing that in the midst of all that chaos, while you have that urgency to fire that information off right away, you have to ask you just have to constantly remind yourself, is this right? Do we need to phrase this differently? Because I think that's really where I found myself borderline getting into trouble with what I was saying. Just don't trust it because you're hearing it on the scanner. If you see the police move right, it may have been because of something entirely different than what you're expecting.
Sean, I am deeply grateful to you. I know you are beyond busy. Aaron Brown, thanks a million for sharing your experience with us. Everybody, stay with us now, because we have 2 more hours of conversations right here on the Google Hangout. Hashtag Race for Truth. In just a very short minute or so, my colleague Kenny Irby will be here with 2 Pulitzer Prize winning photographers and another photographer who actually was in the race and witnessed firsthand what happened. We're going to be talking about when and how to use graphic images, disturbing images, one of the big questions in covering a story like this, and we want you to participate. So hashtag Race for Truth on Twitter. Thanks a million for being with us in the first hour. And Kenny Irby is up next with wonderful photographers.
Nice work.
Thank you, Al.
Do you want to use this? Just leave it here?
Yeah, just leave it here. Seconds away, I couldn't hardly listen because it was the telephone and it was the disconnects. Here, this is yours.
Yep.
John's in the bear disappeared, so I don't know. Hopefully he'll be back.
All right.
Alright.
Yes, John.
Yes, if you want to wear the headphones, you can. Do you want to? Or want to try it without?
I can put them on. You might
Put
as
'em
well
on?
be better safe than sorry.
And there's everybody. Okay, perfect. All right, whenever you're ready, let me know and we'll.
Hey, guys. I don't hear anybody.
Good afternoon.
All right, that's Dave. I heard Dave. Barry, you want to give me a mic check? He's talking, but I don't hear anything.
you're live, so.
Okay. John, can you hear me? Okay, so.
Okay, here I am.
Okay, got Barry. John, we need to get audio on you.
Let me get my lower thirds going. You didn't tell me I needed a headset, Kenny.
Well, I didn't know until just now, so don't feel bad. I just put mine on. But if you can hear, you don't need a headset. We're just going to do a quick check, and then we'll go forward here. John, we're still trying to hear from you.
How's that? Can you hear me?
I just heard you now. Got you good.
All right, here I am.
All right, good afternoon, folks. I'm Kenny Irby, and we're here at the Poynter Institute for this Google Hangout as we continue this conversation that started earlier, focusing on the race for truth. I think one of the questions we want to toss out there just as we get started is, does speed trump truth in this new era that we're living in? And I remind you that we have three great individuals who are with us, who are practicing photojournalists, and David, who is now received a great deal of popularity because of a decisive moment that he documented after the bombing, and that will be taking questions at the hashtag Race for Truth. And Regina McCombs is assisting us. I want to just remind David, Barry, and John that we had three quick questions on the front end that we were considering. One, and I'll just read it real quickly here. I'll read all three. One is, what are the best standards for dealing with tragedy, horrific images in this day and age? Two is, in the era of rampant immediate distribution via the internet in particular, images and video, much of it is produced by individuals, non-professionals, citizen journalists, amateurs, and as we've heard, hobbyist photographers who, that's one way David was described. I don't know if he considers himself as a hobbyist photographer, but we'll hear from him. But now as we think about the impact of social media, how important is it for us to continue to be sensitive and compassionate to the communities as we develop new standards for documenting and depicting grief? And then last but not least, what are the responsibilities for professional journalists and journalism associations and media companies when it comes to sorting, documenting, editing, and distributing images over mobile, internet, and legacy platform? So with that, I want us to jump into this conversation, and I will. We have about 11 prompt images that we'll bring in and have a conversation that each of our panelists have contributed to. But when you think of the idea, the legacy strategy for dealing with graphic and traumatic images, maybe some people still call them horrible images. We used to think that seeking the truth, putting truth first, acting independently, and minimizing harm was a strategy that would work. And now in the internet, where lots of photographs are not really being edited, they're being documented and distributed fairly quickly. What are some new ways of thinking about the content? So Barry, I know you've got some thoughts, and you're on the screen. Give us some opening thoughts on what you think are guiding principles that still endure.
Sure. First of all, speed never trumps truth. As a journalist, our first goal is to get as close and as accurate to the truth as possible. So speed absolutely never, ever trumps truth. You know, in World War II, it took months to get images back from the war field. We do it now in seconds, and a few extra minutes to get it right isn't going to change anything. Just because the masses are hungry for an image doesn't mean that it has to be your image this second. It can be in a few minutes when we get it right. We get the name right, we get the situation right, we understand what's unfolding before our eyes, and so absolutely not. You have to get it right. That goes whether you're in TV or any form of journalism. We leave the speculation and the quick hearsay stuff to people with iPhones and the general public that can, tweet about it instantaneously. That's fine. But truth always trumps speed, in as far as I'm concerned.
All right, David, what's your thought on that scenario? Does speed trump truth?
I actually think that Barry hit it, because from his perspective, you're looking for the best image that captures the truth. From a participant's image, there's an aspect to speed that's very important to also capturing truth. I don't think there were that many, as you pointed out, but there were a lot of people with iPhones and mobile devices that could have taken photographs. And in that moment, I think it's important for us as participants in whatever events are happening to remain calm and actually act with some speed in a way that could support an outcome that is truthful. So there's two different perspectives.
Okay. And John, what are your thoughts on that issue?
I think truth is truth. I mean, pictures that I take don't lie. It's also, speed for me to get out the pictures right away. In terms of what I had to do, I stayed at the marathon as long as I could before I was literally thrown out. But I think the truth is in the pictures from professionals and from, at first I was down on some, amateur photographers about being there, but I think in retrospect, I think any photography that showed what happened there was important. But I think in terms of what we do as professional photographers, as newspaper photographers, I mean, it's all about truth. It's about getting people to see the images right away, and we have an agreement with Getty Images, and that's why our photos got out as quick as they did.
Okay, and so as we deal with the challenge of the reality and truthfulness is always not a pleasant presentation, and the challenge to document it, the experiences of not only the victims that are in those photographs, but also increasingly we become sensitive as a society to the impact on the photojournalists themselves, the photographers who document these tragic and horrific scenarios are as much victims in terms of their emotional health. And so the challenge that we want to talk about is how do we develop some new standards within media organizations, and then how do we communicate those, because as David articulated and represents as well, that citizens, other contributors, the fifth estate, if you will, now are making a major impression on the photographic narrative that we see. So Barry, you started us off with a conversation, and we're going to look at it. We're going to start off with one of your images to move us into the conversation that takes us back to the Aurora shooting. And so we're going to share this image, and you can speak to it on the screen for us.
First of all, I want to say that in that moment, I've been a photojournalist for 15, 20 years, if you include early years, but going on 20 years of being a professional photojournalist, and including school and stuff. But I've been doing it a while, and I've shot a lot of horrific events, a lot of very tough moments. And I want to say that when I went to the Aurora shootings, when I was in this moment, this day, I think in my mind everything had slowed down. I've done it so many times that it actually was very. It just felt natural. So, in my mind, I said, okay, I have to approach this in a very smart way, and the way to do this is both micro and macro. I have to look at it in the micro view and the macro view. The micro view is this man is holding up a picture of his son. He's saying, I was transmitting, and when I heard this loud, booming voice screaming, "Have you seen my son? Have you seen my son? This is my son, Alex Sullivan." And he's slamming this picture in front of all the lenses, all the cameras. We were kind of pinned up at that point. And he's screaming, like, "The police won't tell me my son. I can't find my son." And you knew as a journalist where his son was. You knew.
And this particular image, you said it impacted you, and the impact that it had on you was what?
Well, I photographed him holding his family, I think, about an hour earlier, his wife and daughter. And I think at that point they knew, but they had no confirmation. And so I had already photographed this man. I hadn't spoken with him, but I had photographed him, and I knew they were in the middle of this. And so when I saw him again charging the media, I just began to rattle. My bones were rattled because I have a 3-year-old son. I heard in his voice my voice, "Have you seen my son?" With the deepest desperation, knowing as a journalist, knowing full well that 99% chance his son is still in that theater, and that power. The power of that man's voice just made me cry. I was crying. I couldn't control myself. Crying, shaking. My bones are shaking. All I could do is pick up my camera and start shooting because I was blown away by this unique, very powerful moment. And so, but throughout the day, I wanted to just kind of reiterate that you have to look at it from a micro level and a macro level. The macro level is the world needs to know about this, and pretty quick. And on the micro level, this man has lost his son. And I have to be sensitive to both those things. And I have to work.
And so Barry, what prepares you for something like this? What prepares you to be able to cover an event like this? You know, was this your first traumatic scenario that you'd been into, or was it? I covered TWA Flight 800 in the 90s. I was out on the water, you know, with floating bodies, you know, teddy bears floating above the wreckage. I was on a skip boat, you know, as an intern for the Philadelphia Inquirer. No, I've been doing this a while. You know, you run up on accidents or plane crashes, you see stuff. You know, this isn't my first event like this at all. And what prepares you, number one, is experience. I think you have to get out there and be part of kind of the rescue effort. You have to see how police and fire work so that you understand the emergency situation and how they stay calm. How do they stay focused on saving lives and doing their job in these emergency situations? And if you start there, you know, go visit a firehouse, go on a ride along, you know, you start there, and then you have to have some life experience. You have to have, you know, gone to your own funerals, your own loved ones. You have to have some understanding of life and death. You have to be prepared. And increasingly, we live in a much more violent world, and so the scenarios that we have historically seen as events that would happen in foreign locations or abroad are now scenarios that we as journalists and as citizens in the United States are dealing with on a much more regular basis. And so, John, we're going to go to you, and we're going to move into the Patriots Day experience. And let me ask you that same question. Is your interview with Poynter Online, I want to thank you for that sharing, but I also want to ask you to consider what has prepared you over your 30-year Boston Globe experience. Was there anything that prepared you for the Marathon Day?
I think my experiences are similar to Barry's experiences. We've been through those fires and car accidents and plane crashes. We've seen a lot in our careers. I've seen a lot in my personal life. I don't know if you can call it, hardening your feelings or however terminology you want to use, but I think in the newspaper business, you have the good and you have the bad. You have the shootings that you go to sometimes you're the first person there. Sometimes you're the first person at a fire or a car accident. And I think, as Barry would attest to, you have to react, and you have to react as a human being. You have to react as a photojournalist at the same time. I was telling somebody earlier, we're not superhuman. We're not wearing Superman vest, or we're not wearing bulletproof vests. We're not EMTs, but we are thrown into all these different scenarios. It's almost like we're thrown out of a helicopter and landing, and you don't know what your next assignment's going to be, but you have to react. I think, like Barry said, I'm having a tough time at dealing with what I saw, and I think time will heal, and I hope so. But when you're in that moment, you're in that zone. You have a job to do as a photojournalist, and you have to act as professional as you can as a human being. So.
Okay. So this is a perfect segue. We have a question about, not just in the documenting experience, a Twitter question on Photoshop. And so we put up this the photograph of yours that the Daily News actually did use what we, since they've been silent and not responded to any of our inquiries in the industry, but we presume that it was Photoshop, where the individual in the background with the broken leg, it was Photoshop. Should we, if as you and Barry and Dave have all attested to the value of authenticity and truthfulness, then what happens with Photoshop? How does our ethics become skewed, our integrity eroded when the viewing masses know that Photoshop is a tool, and then a publication actually uses it to manipulate an image? John?
It's not the first time it's happened. I mean, as well as I do, it's happened before. And as a photographer, I am so careful to make sure that my use of Photoshop is basically used to crop the photo, to dodge and burn where necessary. And that's about it. I don't go into anything else. I leave it up to the editors to decide. And if this was the Boston Globe and they wanted to use that photo, I'm sure they would have used that photo just the way it is. It's an image that shows what it shows. It's not pleasant to look at, but I'm not going to sugarcoat the photos that I turn in. I think people react differently to different photos, and I have an amazing story to tell you about this person in this photo. If you wanted to hear that now, we can talk about it later.
Yeah, no, go ahead. We're on that topic, and we'll
Okay.
segue. Go ahead.
So I did an interview with the Charlotte Observer, and I just read the story last night that the family of this woman, Nicole Gross, sent out a press statement saying that please refrain from using any future use of this photo. And I never knew that, but I turned this in. It was used, as you said, on the cover of the New York Daily News and several other newspapers. I got a call yesterday from Nicole Gross's mother-in-law, and she said that Nicole would like to meet me in person at the hospital and would like to thank me and support me, and would like to just say how proud she is of me being there and for actually taking that photo. And I just find that amazing, that a family would reach out to me after their initial reaction, and now, reaching out to me in terms of wanting to thank me, which I will do on Tuesday and visit Nicole at the hospital.
I think that's really interesting. One of the things that we've learned at Poynter in our coverage of other kinds of traumatic experiences, whether they were bombings or after 9/11, the Fallujah murders of the three contractors, several situations like that. When there's more transparency, when audiences know and have insight about the thinking, the thought process, and the decision-making process, that they are much less reactive as a viewing, reading, and listening public when we share, when we offer disclosure and insight, and maybe even write in detail or report some part of our decision-making. about those photographs. Photoshop, as you said, is a tool. It's a tool that's been out there. The digital darkroom experience, every photograph goes through some layer or layers of manipulation and adjustment for tonal correction and authenticity. I want to move you to this next photograph, which I know you know very well, and it has been used, one of the most published images, and it's worth noting that the last photograph, the New York Star Ledger, did use it on its cover without manipulating it. So there are a range of alternatives that we have, and that's one of the things that we have to talk about to be better and more excellent in our ethical decision making, are the alternatives. This photograph, set us up in timeline and experience for this image.
So this is probably 4 or 5 minutes after the first explosion at the finish line. This is when I had gained access to get to the sidewalk area. And this is Sydney Corcoran. She's an 18-year-old high school student from Lowell, Mass. She was laying there. These two men came over. They stopped the bleeding. She had a artery cut. If it wasn't for them, she would have bled to death. She almost lost all her blood. And this was just one of several various photos I took of her. The Boston Globe used it on the front page. The New York Times used it on the front page. My editors discussed which photos to use with me, and then they had their own discussion, but came to the conclusion that this picture has every element in it that would show the world, or show our readers, the humanitarian help, the people volunteering, basically saving this woman's life. You see some blood. It's not really gory, but you see the scene. You see the police in the background. It's on Boylston Street. And after Sydney got out of surgery, first thing she wanted to know is who the two men were that rescued her and saved her life.
Yeah.
And I was talking, I just did an interview before I got on here with CBS. CBS, I believe. I've done so many, but I had mentioned that the news photography now has taken on another dimension, especially with this marathon bombing, where it's brought families and communities closer in a way that I've never seen before, because they were mentioning when they talked to me, some of the families had emailed me saying that they wanted to thank me for the photos, for bringing attention how horrific this event was, but also it helped unite people to know who the victims were. It put a name on a face. It wasn't just some bombing victim laying on the ground. Every person has a name. Every person is an individual, and I think that brought it to another dimension, which I never expected.
Well, I mean, I think that's really an important question, and we have another Twitter question. What elements are needed to accurately portray what's happening? I mean, you could, another form of what I would argue is editing, and some might call manipulation, is how we eliminate elements, or we clarify a photograph, much like we do with words. And while it's an editing step, it does have ethical parameters to it. When we edit a photograph, we've usually, historically, we've only eliminated elements by cropping. And now we have the capacity to add or modify in major ways through Photoshop. And so I want to get David in on the conversation here. David, when you think about as a citizen, you're a businessman in Jacksonville, you were in Boston as a part of as a runner, so you ran the marathon, and then you found yourself in the midst of maybe arguably the biggest news story of your life. So what are your thoughts on this conversation about accuracy and ethical decision making in images?
Well, there's so much. This is a great conversation. First I just have to say, never having been involved in such a tragedy and being that close to it. I was in New York at 9/11, but not that close. Hats off to the photojournalists who are on this. I have a lot of respect and a lot of gratitude for what you guys go through. I find it very, very difficult. I can only imagine getting numb to it at some point. you know, I've heard a lot of elements that relate to me in that moment, whether it was having some experience at 9/11 or just running races. But in that moment that I was walking into Bomb 2 and I was probably 50 yards, I was coming across Fairfield, time really slowed down for me when, you know, I was overloaded with sensory, you know, tragic, you know, bombing from sight, sound, smell, screaming. It was absolute mayhem in that 10 seconds afterwards, and time did slow down, and I just had enough to think that, you know, as a citizen, there might be something here on a micro level that may be meaningful to a truthful outcome that captures whoever was behind it, and at the same time trying to capture an image that would represent kind of what was happening, what I saw through my eyes, a lot like you know, was said, you know, from a macro perspective, and it was just one photo that I took to kind of capture those two elements before I ran in and tried to help these people. I ran up to the Martin girl, and I actually was just thrown backwards when I saw her lying there, as hurt as she was, and was incapable of doing anything. And then I ran over to the barricades and was again incapable of doing anything. And all I could think to do was just maybe just grab my camera and shoot a video. And you know, one of the things that came out of it was identifying the fireman who was helping the girl, and I think in hindsight probably saved her life by applying a tourniquet, and was able to provide that video to connect the two of them, and also just give people an idea of kind of the heroic first responders who put themselves in harm's way to save lives.
And while you were sharing that incredible experience here, I put up your decisive moment within the photojournalism world. We think of the decisive moment in Henri Cartier-Bresson, one of the pioneers of photojournalism. Tell us about this. You made one frame. Is that correct? You made one frame.
That was it. I was on an iPhone. And you know, 99% of my pictures are out of focus and bad, and this was the one that was actually good. You know, you talk about Photoshop. What's interesting for me is I took that photo and never edited it, didn't touch it. I posted it on my Facebook account on Monday night, and I offered it to the FBI and went down that path, but really just to give my friends and family and people in the community who were worried about me just a glimpse of kind of what I saw. And a couple of things jump out at me. One is when the photo kind of got into the public domain as a suspect number 2, you know, good photo, New York Times, CNN, everybody, FBI, did you take this photo? And, you know, I was kind of like shocked. Of course I took this photo. Who would take this photo? Have you, you know, and they asked me a lot of questions. No, I haven't edited it. So, you know, again, just from my perspective, it was kind of surprising, never having been there or thinking that actually happens. Number 2, I'm seeing the photo that you're showing as the one that's mostly used, and that's not the full photo that I took that captures that macro picture of what was going on in that moment, from, you know, people panicking and the smoke in the background and the, you know, the Boylston in the background, and this little figure, suspect number 2, who's essentially trying to walk off the left frame of the picture as he watched this happen and thinking he's going to get away from it. So, you know, this is not an original photo, it's a crop photo of it.
So you're actually making the case that we shared earlier that in this photograph, the editing process, or some would argue the manipulative process, has been that it was cropped. And this is a suspect to Jihad Taniriev. And so you didn't do that, and a second party did. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And you know, a lot of people looked at this photo and said, you know, they knew the photo I took. They didn't even know that was my photo. But I took the broader photo, of which that was cropped, and sometimes you also see it Photoshop so that his face is highlighted or there's arrows on it or something going on. But from somebody looking and saying, you took that photo, I really didn't zoom in on suspect number 2 with an iPhone, which is what that makes it look like. I had a very broad photo.
And that's an excellent thought, because oftentimes the 2 professional photographers, Barry, who's now independent and a former staff photographer at the illustrious Rocky Mountain News now, and John at the Barry, don't do that. I can see Barry in the background, and it is a sad reality that publication is no longer existing. And that takes us to another piece, but we won't digress here. We'll stay on track. I want to go to John, and John, as we talk about citizen contributions, reader, viewer submitted content, has your feelings kind of changed on that? I think you moved a little bit on that position.
I was a little harsh in the original interview. I did not see David's picture, and I did not know that that was who took it. I think I'm still apprehensive about. I'll tell you. I'll give you a good example. Okay, there was a person who claimed to be a rescuer, who was in the thick of things, and I saw him with his iPhone out, standing in where the bodies were, taking pictures, and he went on TV one night and was telling people how he helped everybody. He might have, but he was there taking pictures too. That bothers me. It bothers me that, not what David did, but it bothers me that people, are kind of voyeurs in a way. If they were journalists, it's one thing, but they're just kind of, let's put this on YouTube for my friends to see. And it like I said, David did the right thing. David just happened to have that suspect in his picture, but he captured a moment from a different angle that we didn't see, that I didn't see because I couldn't get down there. And I congratulate David on that photo. I mean, I think, I think that there's no rules out there for citizen journalism. There's no code of conduct. There's a lot of gray areas about whether people manipulate their photos before they put them on YouTube or send them out. I just don't. I'm not comfortable with it right now. That's all I think about.
I think that is the segue of the hour in our segment. How do we move to establishing some sanction and comprehensive, not necessarily comprehensive, but some clear guidelines and expectations in the kind of photographs that we see in mainstream media distribution? Because as you and Barry have articulated, there is a professional ethic, if you will, a professional set of guidelines. There are protocols that are developed by associations, the National Press Photographers Association, the Society for News Design, RTNDA, also in video, Sigma Delta Chi. There are a range of professional associations that have guidelines for ethical decision making, as well as most media organizations have their guidelines that are in place. So how do we move to a more comprehensive way of communicating and articulating those guidelines? Barry, I know you have some thoughts on that. What do you say?
Absolutely. Okay, so first of all, I would like to say that we as photojournalists and visual journalists, we really need to be proponents of accurate photographs and photography being released to the public, especially through any reputable news organization or website. If we catch, and John, I certainly know this, that in your career you've run across other photographers that manipulate things or have in the past, and it's even more prevalent abroad. And if I notice something that doesn't look right, I'm calling that colleague out, whether I work next to him or if he's in another newspaper or a competing newspaper. I've done that. I've quietly went to photo editors and said, is this accurate, because this doesn't look like a real photograph. something's wrong here, and without telling the whole world that someone manipulated a photograph, but really went and addressed what I felt could have been a manipulated photograph, because every time a photograph is manipulated, it degrades the value of what we do, and the authenticity of our accuracy and our accurate images becomes less accurate, and the public stops to believe in us. Once they stop to believe in us, our credibility is shot. Our value is zero. We are zero.
Yeah.
So without credibility, a news organization has nothing. And I implore any editor, any publisher to really continue to fight for accuracy, whether it's in the word or in a photograph. Because without that credibility, we're done. We're useless.
Well, I think you're right there in terms of our credibility of our content that we brand and put our name on in terms of media organizations and the practitioners like you all who are out there committing acts of journalism on a regular daily basis. I think one of the challenges that we definitely have to think about is the value of credibility. People will continue to patron our organizations and subscribe to the publications as long as they believe and have that sacred trust is in place between the society, the democracy, or the citizens in the country and that publication. However, that's not a universal standard, and we do need to find ways to communicate those and to hold each other accountable, because in the professional realm, we could call the name of Patrick Snyder and Brian Walsky, and we know that there are photographers who have been fired for manipulation of images and misrepresentation of inaccurate information. So this is a real important step. Now I want to go back to David, because one of your colleagues in the citizen submitted content or the citizen journalists, I'm going to use some of the descriptions and labels out there, was Bob Leonard. And Bob's photograph that the Associated Press picked up, they were used as a major element of identifying the two suspects. Now, was your picture used to your knowledge in any way as an identifying factor for the FBI or Homeland Security? David?
Well, when I called the FBI, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
when
you're
I
back.
contacted the FBI, I contacted the FBI at about 7 p.m. and it was rapidly escalated and shared amongst various agents and departments. And to my knowledge, it was the best photograph that existed at the time. And I think that there was a continuum over which lots of photos came out. So I don't know if it was directly responsible for what ultimately unfolded. What I do believe is that it was critical for the press cycle, the media cycle. As a watcher of CNN, a lot of people were glued to kind of trying to see what was happening and how they might be able to help. You look at the same 5-second reel 50 times in an hour, you get a little numb and disinterested, and to the extent that maybe that picture provided something fresh and energized some people to maybe be on the lookout, I think at minimum it helped do that.
Well, and I think that's an excellent point of notation here, is that we live in a society that is incredibly visualized now, and so the way the case was built, that law enforcement has clearly articulated that the videos from cameras in the area in stationary positions, the videos and images that were submitted helped to bring a swift response for identifying the brothers who were responsible for this heinous crime. I think we have to then think about, okay, so now let's go back to one of those other previously articulated guiding principles, if you will, about acting independently. Now, both of the professional journalists here and I'm going to go to John. Under what circumstances would you let the FBI or the Boston Police Department see all your images?
Well, my question to Dave is, Dave, were you subpoenaed, or did you voluntarily turn in the photo?
No, I voluntarily sent the photo in to them, and at the end of the conversation, I asked, my one interest here is to see how I can help. And an agent told me it's your constitutional right to distribute this photo in any way you'd like. And I think that the FBI's strategy with this was to go public and get as many, recruit as many photos and identifiers of these suspects as possible. And so I did post that photo.
That was on your Facebook page, right? You posted the image?
So asked people to share it.
Okay. So, John, what's your response to that?
I know if the FBI wanted my photos, they would have to go through the Globe and probably subpoena them. That's happened before with other photos I've taken in years past. But I think there's a process that, you know, as newspapers, we have to protect our sources or our photos, our property. And if the FBI needed those photos that I took, they certainly could have subpoenaed them. But we didn't voluntarily put any photos out there that weren't published. I mean, everything that was out there, the FBI probably could look at, but we would want a subpoena in that case.
Okay. And I think that, Barry...
Would you do that as an individual, John? I mean, you represent the Globe, but would you do that as an independent photographer?
Oh, I would. As an independent photographer, I wouldn't have an issue without a subpoena. I would have done exactly what David would have done.
Right.
But I think because there's a bigger news organization behind it, I couldn't personally have done it. They would have had to go through a process of subpoenaing the photos, and I think it would have been an expedited process. I'm not saying, you know, it was a big deal, but I think we have have it, you know, written up the way the process would have to happen, and we would have dealt with our lawyers in that case.
Right. I mean, you're setting precedents for other things that would happen. I mean, you're in, and that's the business that the Globe is in. So yes.
Right.
Right, and so the idea of acting independently is still a valuable guiding principle moving forward. And what we're now seeing is that it's not always an either or, it's the and proposition, because now at the end of the day, images are now streaming into the television screens and the pages of publications and on TV screens as well, and on mobile devices and every other way, on tablet panels. People are now being given many more options for understanding and truth-telling. I want to bring us back as we move into the last segment here and talk about a couple of other areas as it relates to grief and struggle. So we've looked at covering trauma in some ways, but I'd like to get your comments on some other images where we've seen recently where folks have struggled with what to publish, and so we go back to the Kevin Ware injury. This is an image, and I can see your faces, so I'm going to ask Barry, what comes to mind? Is that an image that the viewing public needs to see, and is it important to publish it?
Wow. You know, working in a newspaper, there was a thing called the breakfast table test. If you can't look at this picture and have breakfast with your children, it's probably not good for the front page. I don't always agree with that. I think there's times in our national and our local histories, you know, where when we go to war, we need to be able to see what war looks like, and I think there's a certain line there, the macro view, that doesn't need a breakfast table test. This is an athlete. He had an injury. It was in a public event. Does this need to be shown to the world? Not necessarily, and definitely not on the front page. This is not, you know, the benefit of shocking me and this is I've never seen this image. This is very shocking.
Well, this
does
is
not outweigh the value.
Yeah, this is a Sam Ritchie photo from McClatchy Tribune News Service, and I want to definitely get David in as an athlete. You know, what's your response to an image like this? Does it need to be published? Does it need to be seen? It's all over the internet, and was minutes after the injury.
Second.
Yeah, you know, I don't need to see that. I think the organizations have to establish their own, you know, standards, professionalism. It's the you know, it's where you look for things to capture moods and you know, high quality images. I think on the other end of the spectrum, you have the internet today, which is just a garbage heap of crap and some reputable organizations at the top of that. And you know, it's a branding exercise to, you know, for people out there to say, I want to look at that news organization's photos because they're respectful, they're meaningful, impactful, all the things that I want out of you know, images and news. And then there's all the other stuff. I look at that, I don't need to see that. It's not respectful to him or to.
Yeah, well, and that image was played over and over. It was at NCAA regional finals. It was the injury was frame grabbed and paused over and over in video. So, John, is there a difference is this a place where video and still photographs vary and differ?
You know, this is a place where reporting is more important than photos, because I read it in the paper and it was like three or four words. The bone came out through his skin. I mean, what more do you would need to see? I mean, you can visualize that. You can probably hear it in your head. You know, I mean, I don't need to see that picture. The picture, I think, is you know, it's graphic. It's exploiting that situation. It's not like it's a life or death situation for like it was at the Boston Marathon. I mean, it's a sporting event, and I think David's right about, you know, it gets out on the internet and people are like, oh, look at this. You know, I just kind of picture a bunch of guys sitting around the bar going, hey, did you see this picture? Isn't this crazy? You know, and, oh, I got one better for you. And I think that's what's wrong about this whole internet, you know, media thing. I mean, you know, years ago we all shot film, and you know, you go back to black and white and color film, and it was a whole process of processing film and coming back. And I was thinking, if this was the Boston Marathon of 1980, would we have had people, you know, going to CVS and turning in all their film and having it developed and looking at it, you know, and going, oh, I think I have a suspect. I think, you know, and the other thing about your question about video, I don't know. I did not shoot one frame of video when I was at the marathon, and I'm glad I didn't. My mind was in photography mode, still photos. It's a different thought process. I've done a lot of videos, but I just could not, you know, I mean, I think if I had shot video that day, I would have not got the images that I got, and I think it's just a whole different thought process.
Yeah, well, I'll come to you in a second, Barry. It is a different thought process. It is a different experience, and increasingly with the hybrid cameras, and as David alluded to, maybe his first thought would have been to make a video. And Barry and John, you both have cameras that allow you to do both high definition full motion video and high definition freeze frame imagery. Barry, what are your thoughts? And we've got about our last 8 minutes here, and I'd want to give you one more case study to respond to.
Okay, real quick, just the difference between video and stills is that a video rarely gets played over and over and over, just like in the bombings with the suspects walking across that over and over. We all saw that about 500 times in a 24-hour period. But in that case, yeah, that video was played over and over. In most cases, in 99% of the time, video is looked at once and that's it. You're done. You're never going to look at it again. You don't watch movies over and over and over unless you're 4 years old. Now, with a still image, it has power, and that's where that's my That's my passion, is photojournalism and still photography, because there's a power in a still image that is not carried over to video. And that power is that it sits there. In the case of a newspaper, it's on your breakfast table all day long, or on your website. You can go to it and stare at it and examine it and re-examine it. And we can have discussions about it. And it's power. It's a true, deep power. It's a moment in time that will never, it's a freeze frame moment that is so powerful that video just rarely captures that. And even if it does, it's a fleeting moment. And that's the difference.
And many videographers and now multimedia journalists are now dealing with covering death, which is another area where community audiences and citizens and readers and viewers respond that this image is horrific. So one of the things that we think is important at Poynter is that you name the ethical issue that you're dealing with, whether it's blood, whether it's gore, whether it's profanity, nudity, and then death. And that goes back to Barry's earlier statement that we often have a breakfast test. And now we are forced to deal with the fact that death is an inextricable part of life. And so I want to ask David, what do you think about an image like that when you're actually showing death? That was actually Paul Hansen, a Swedish photojournalist, World Press winner this year in Spot News and Picture of the Year.
I think that's a very powerful picture. I certainly don't see, from my perspective, why it couldn't be used. There's nothing grotesque or vile in it. It's just a very powerful picture.
All right, John, how do we deal with showing death, depicting death?
I'm fine with this picture. I think I did a story on a young boy who was a victim of gang violence about 5 years ago, and the family invited me to the funeral home, and I took a picture of the open casket with the family looking at his body. And there were some pictures, I believe, from the Aurora shooting. There was an open casket picture, I believe, at the funeral home. I think if it's done right, I think it's as powerful a statement as anything. I mean, this picture that I'm looking at right now, I mean, it's just a beautiful picture, even though it's death. I mean, in terms of what's going on in that picture, it reminds me of one of the great, like master paintings from, that would be hanging in a museum. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, think back to before photography, and there was paintings of death, and people still go to museums and look at death. I mean, I think just because if it's a photo doesn't make any difference.
Barry, I see all your awards in the background now and your credentials hanging back there. What do you think? Final word on this image before we wrap up.
Death is as much part of life as life. And I think the sooner we come to grips with our own mortality and the soul, the sooner that the better we can live, and the more we put names and faces with souls and connect the two, and the more we'll respect life, and hopefully we'll have less and less of this horrific violence that we've seen and witnessed. So I really believe that we need to start respecting life, and even in death. That picture that you showed was so powerful because it respected these children. It was a procession. It was a funeral procession, cradling their babies, and they're respecting life. Yeah. They're giving them their final respect, and I think that's what we need in society, not this lack of respect where we kill innocents, and that's just...
It certainly is a challenging proposition, and I want to give each of you a final thought to kind of summarize what you would like to think your takeaway contribution is, your contribution for the conversation. At Poynter, we want journalists and practitioners for the Fourth Estate, Fifth Estate, citizen journalists, university students, college professors, everyone who's consuming this information, to think more thoughtfully about the importance of truth-telling across the board and accuracy and the veracity of the information that we present. to be transparent, to be more engaging and willing to share, and to be more sensitive to a much more broader and diverse community as we go forward. So, David, give us your last thought, a takeaway thought from the conversation.
There's so much good stuff here. I think my takeaway, is that events are happening at all times around the world. From a spectator's position or an athlete or just a citizen, you're going to be in these times where it's important to stay calm and act with some speed to help bring about an outcome that could be expedited in the case of the Boston massacre. And I think from the media's perspective, you guys are in control, hopefully, of the outlets that show the photos, the images that we take, and how they're cropped or not cropped, and make those judgments on how to best share that with the world.
Barry, give us a thought. A thought.
Wow, life is a very valuable thing, and I think as a photojournalist, I want to continue to document that life. I think that I want to do it in an accurate, truthful way, and I encourage all citizens with a camera on their iPhone to do the same thing, and use your images for good, not for evil. Don't hurt your fellow man. Don't hurt your fellow students. Don't embarrass them to no end, as we've seen in so many horrible instances. The wrong use of the wrong pictures, and value life and value love. And I think that that's a great guiding force for our future.
All right, John, my friend and classmate at Boston University, give us a final thought.
I keep thinking, a well-rounded photographer would want to take some really beautiful pictures too, not just blood and gore and car accidents and bombings. And we all have on our days off, you see a beautiful picture of a hawk in a tree and you want to capture that moment. I think there's a lot of other things to do with photography than just, being on the street and covering sad things, or, this past 2 years has just been incredible with what we've covered, from Newtown, Connecticut, to the Aurora, shootings, to tornadoes and everything you can imagine. And I think we need to kind of step back a little bit and realize that, photography is so powerful, but there's also some other images out there that we can make that can cheer people up, that can bring a face to photojournalism, that the happiness and the events that put smiles on people's faces. We can't just dwell on this tragic event in Boston. We're going to get over it, and I think the spirit of Boston will live on in everybody. And I think that's our job as photojournalists, is to continue to document how Boston will recover.
All right, John Tomacki, David Green, and Barry Gutierrez, thank you so much for your contributions. This conversation has been archived on video. We hope that you will continue to move forward. We hope that you will continue to turn to Poynter for your training and your consulting needs in this important area. We want to announce Teacher Palooza that's coming up on June the 21st through the 23rd. And the editing seminar in 2013, How to Wear 5 Hats and Succeed. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for Kelly McBride.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Pleasure to meet you guys. Thank you.
Meet you guys, and I applaud both of you guys. I don't know if we're still on, but and both of you guys, it's really great to share this time with you, and I'm just so grateful for both of you. And John, I'd love to chat with you more, and maybe we could Skype sometime. And
okay.
And if you just kind of talk, I think talking about it helps. If you don't talk about it, and it's hard to talk about it to people that don't do this, and so my door is open to you if you just want to chat. Have a cup of coffee tomorrow morning or something.
Okay.
Work or something, and we can just let out some stuff. So what's your phone number?
617.
Oh wait, I don't know if we're still with 500. I'll just
You're on live, guys.
I'll email you, Barry. I'll email you.
It's just barrygutierrez.com. Barry at barrygutierrez.com.
I will email you. Okay.
That'd
Thanks,
be
Barry.
awesome.
Thanks,
All right,
David. I'm proud of you for what you did.
Yes, David, very much.
Thank you, guys. I don't know how you do it, man. I got a lot of respect for you guys. It's I just can't imagine. Really tough.
Are you going to run next year?
Oh yeah, and I'm going to tell you right now, there's such a groundswell right now from everybody I've spoken to who's going to be out there to make it an incredible event. I think the run community in general, you know, we hurt ourselves so that we can run faster and better and longer, and I think the psyche of the community is one such that, you know, this is not down and out. It's something to overcome and get better from. So I think it's going to add obviously another dimension to next year's race and forever, that it's going to be a very meaningful and special.
Oh yeah, it's going to be huge.
Yeah.
I'm really proud. I'm really proud of Boston right now. They're gonna take this thing and make it right. And you know, there's a lot of people that need a lot of love and recovery, but
that's right.
this will help inspire them, you know, raise money.
Hey, thank you
Hey,
guys.
guys.
We
Gotta
are
run.
Cheers,
actually
guys.
getting ready
Yeah.
to start the next hangout,
Oh, great. Okay,
but it looks like we have everybody here.
we could do our own.
Yeah, there you go. You guys can do your own.
All right. See ya.
All right, welcome. Let's see. Where are my notes? I had them in my hand. Thank you. I'm so prepared for this broadcast stuff. Well, welcome. Thank you very much for coming. This is the third hour of our 3-hour hangout where we are visiting with experts from a variety of areas. Our first hour was spent with Al Tompkins, where we talked about accuracy. Our second hour was spent with Kenny Irby, where we talked about images and how those images were handled. In this hour, we're going to talk about social media. And I'm joined by Drew Curtis. Hi, Drew.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, Eric Martin from Reddit. Eric, can you say that again? We are not getting your sound, so check and see if you get a mute button clicked. And Monica Guzman from the Seattle Times.
Hey, everyone.
Eric, you might have to take your headphones off. So last week seemed like a seminal moment in a media shift. I think of other moments in media development, like the OJ car chase that we watched live on CNN, or even the invasion of Kuwait, where we realized that something new was happening in media. Last week had that kind of feel for me. And Monica, I really want you to start off, since you're not associated with a social media platform per se. I want you to start off by telling us how you described the events of last week and what was so significant about that.
Yeah, I agree with you that something felt like it had shifted. Something felt like it changed. And I think two big dynamics happened as a result of something we've seen before, which is a very large, big developing story. That part isn't new. Two things were new. One, people, it turns out, want more. They want more information. They want to get as much information in a developing story as is possible. And for the first time, we were able to see one particular stream of information, very raw information, a police scanner, be accessible and available on a broad scale and be picked up and listened to by a whole lot of people around the country. So people wanted that raw information that had very interesting results and consequences. The second big dynamic that I think played a part in the whole week was people want to come together. When something big happens that shuts down a city, that has a potential terrorist on the loose, people want to talk about it. And at one point, things started happening in the middle of the night. And it turns out people still want to talk about it. They're in their homes. They're mostly alone, but they have their computers. So I think those two instincts, the instinct to want more and more and more and be as connected to a raw developing story as possible, drove people to some novel ways of getting raw information that had consequences. And secondly, they wanted to talk about those experiences. They wanted to come together around them. There was unity. There was so much powerful emotion. And those two things combine to, I think, reveal some serious changes in the way we share information.
Yeah, and this fits into a concept that you talk about in a chapter that you wrote for a book that Poynter is about to publish called The New Ethics of Journalism. And you talk about the community's ability to self-inform, how it's no longer it's no longer our role as journalists to only inform the community, that they actually have a lot of power themselves.
Yes, and I think with that power comes a lot of responsibility. It's something professional journalists have known all along, and I think it's actually a beautiful thing, if at times a disturbing thing, to see members of the public learn those lessons organically, the lessons that maybe have been taught in journalism schools, members of the public picking them up little by little, realizing, wow, I tweeted out with a lot of confidence the names of 2 suspects that were not really suspects, and what confirmation did I have? The fact that a lot of my friends said that that was the case? That's not confirmation, that's amplification. These little lessons, I kept seeing people pick them up organically and naturally. So it's the entire public realizing how powerful information is and that they wield that power. I think it can be a beautiful, incredible thing. I think as journalists we need to ask what roles are added to our jobs in addition to just informing, maybe modeling good behaviors, maybe encouraging great information communities. I think and hope that that can be what we do.
All right. Eric, let's try it again. Can we hear you now?
Yes. Can you hear me all right?
I can. So how would you describe Reddit's particular role last week?
Sure. I mean, the majority of activity on Reddit was similar. After any big news event or tragedy, you see, people just looking for information there. So you saw people doing these sort of live, almost like live update threads where they're making, 50, 60 edits to a sort of block of text with continuous updates and corrections on, this news site is reporting this person tweeted this, here's a photo, here's this, here's that. And then in the comment threads, which sometimes were, there were 20,000 comments in some of these sort of news threads, people were, doing everything from talking about, okay, what area is that in, or I was in the race, or my friend was at the race, and this is what they told me. So people were just kind of sharing all kinds of different information in the immediate aftermath of the bombing, and then sort of after that, people were kind of helping people who were stranded find accommodations, transportation, and just still trying to, kind of share and aggregate whatever news they could find out there.
And it's funny because, I mean, Reddit has a history of trying to do good. I mean, I think people might not remember this, but there was this video of a middle school bully essentially berating a bus aide, and it was the Reddit community that shed light on that video and raised money for that bus aide. So it's not like those things that you just described are unusual for the Reddit community. They think of themselves, or at least a portion of the Reddit community thinks of itself as a helpful community, right?
Right. I mean, we saw the same thing after the tsunami in Japan. Or the earthquake, and people were just doing everything from trying to find out what happened and get updates and pictures, but also there were people who were on the nearby on the ground who I remember one person went and got groceries for another user's grandmother.
Wow.
Took pictures and shared that. So a lot of anytime something happens, there'll be firsthand accounts from people who were there or have some sort of connection or insight to what was going on.
Right, and less people think we're glossing over. One particular thread on Reddit was titled "Find Boston Bombers," and this is what most people outside of Reddit are talking about these days. And on that thread, you had a large number of people who were searching through videos and photos trying to identify anybody that might be somehow suspicious.
Right. I mean, by large number, I mean, we're talking about a few hundred, with several thousand kind of looking along, just to put it in scale.
And further perspective, how many users on Reddit?
At any, during the sort of height, we're talking hundreds of thousands. In a given day, you're talking several million, but hundreds of thousands at any one particular point in time.
And tell me, how was that thread at its height? How many people were on that thread?
A few thousand.
Okay. All right. Drew, you've been running FARC, which is another similar social media site, for several years. What was going on FARC last week? And then I want to do a follow-up question and have you describe different social media platforms for me.
Yeah, so one of the differences between Reddit and FARC is we're an edited platform, so there's a lot more going on with what we choose to put up there and whatnot. And as a result, I spent a lot of time sort of going through the different news sources and what we were hearing and trying to figure out, like, who's accurate here? Why is the New York Post so different from everybody else? Why is CNN only reading Twitter? These things actually do make a difference. And one of the things that happens during breaking news is you find that the local guys usually have a much better handle of the situation than anybody else does because they're there, obviously. So a lot of it was, pointing out whether or not there was an actual problem going on, what seemed to be right about the reports, what not, like, counter arguments, like, the fact that the New York Post was the only people to label some guys early on also meant something. And then when there were contradictions, basically surfacing those very quickly and trying to make sure that there was sort of just a better idea of what was going on from the ground. And at the same time, talking to members of the community who lived there, who could, lean outside their doors and say, yeah, this is what I see on the street right now.
And so tell me the difference, or tell our audience the difference. You've described the difference between Reddit and FARC. So layer on here, another community that we've talked about a little bit is 4chan. And then you have the broader social networks of Facebook and Twitter. How do each of those networks behave differently in recent times?
Well, the range is basically from community to platform. And so, for example, Twitter is sort of an everything goes kind of place. Reddit to a certain extent as well. FARC is more of an edited, highly moderated, which is probably hard for most people to believe, but believe it or not. And so as a result, I spent a lot of time trying to catch, exactly, yeah. Spend a lot of time trying to catch patterns. For example, if I see a news source that's only reading Twitter or is clearly copying, then that is to be distrusted. But I'll give you an example. Like when CNN started reporting that there was a suspect in custody heading towards the courthouse, I'm flipping back and forth between that, MSNBC, Fox, and I got stuck on Fox because Fox was struggling with this, which was kind of odd. Normally, when something gets out into the news sphere, it tends to get repeated by everybody, but Fox was struggling with it. And eventually, when they finally launched it, they said they did it in a very interesting way. They say, we can't confirm this, but news sources are saying. And I thought that was really interesting because it wasn't really a hedge. They were actually saying, we can't confirm this, but we sat on this for an hour. We have to say something about it. So when I saw that go, I thought, something strange is going on here. And that happened on numerous occasions during the news cycle. I was going to write up a large piece on everything that went wrong, but it would have just been too long and really, really boring, I think, at the end of the day, because I think we can all sort of judge this from a 30,000-foot view and say, what the hell was going on exactly?
Now, pretty early on, people were critical of Reddit, Eric. On Wednesday of that week, Alex Madrigal published a column on theatlantic.com that basically said, hey, Reddit, knock it off. What effect did that criticism and other outside criticism have on the community?
It definitely increased the attention on that one small section, and so you had all of a sudden a lot of people watching that, individuals as well as people in the media. And
here is that page. Now, actually, you were at an event that Wednesday, and I was there too in New York. You were at Paid Content Live, right?
Correct.
Right. And at the time that this was being published, you were actually on stage, and you said something to the effect of, "We are the groundskeepers." What did you mean by that when you were responding to that question? Because I think it was essentially a question that was asking about this same behavior.
Right. So it was asking about that particular subreddit as well. I believe. And yeah, I mean, we say that a lot, that we're the groundskeepers. And by that we mean, we are responsible for sort of, determining rules, determining, providing the actual platform where people build these communities. And in a certain sense, we are, responsible for decisions that can go to cultivate these different communities, but we're not, choosing which communities to create. We're not choosing some of both the technical and design and, of course, content and decisions in the communities themselves. And in most cases, they're kind of chosen, organically through the moderators and people in that community.
So, Monica, I'm interested in that. You sort of are fairly recent to Reddit. You joined a couple months ago and started looking at it as you were writing the book, or the chapter in the book. And tell me what you noticed. What observations did you make about that effect that Eric just described on the community? What happens to a community when they get to set their own terms?
I've been really interested in that for a little while, and the reason is I think about newspaper site comments, and a lot of newspaper reporters have sort of given up on them, and they say, okay, it's a necessary evil, it gets us more traffic, it gets the community talking, but it's such a wild west. People don't really know what they're talking about or what they're saying. What I really admire about Reddit is the whole idea of basic formula. You have a platform, you have moderators, and you have rules. And the moderators have actual power, and the rules have actual force. And I have seen subreddits that blow my mind with the amount of collaborative action that they can inspire among their communities. And since I've learned about that, I've wondered how, what can journalists learn from those models? I've been very inspired by it. So when I saw Find Boston Bombers, it was a very natural outgrowth of that capacity that Reddit has, and the feelings that people had in the wake of this crazy news story, where now we have, oh my gosh, there's a lot of photos from that. What can, users on Reddit, I think it's a natural and good question. What can we do to help? Is there something we can do to help? So I've heard it called in the media an experiment, that site. And Eric, I'd be interested to hear your take on that, whether you consider that an experiment. To me, it's just the natural thing to try and to do. So I didn't find the effort at all with a bad intention or anything like that. I thought, yeah, that's exactly what a space that has both moderators and rules would try to make happen. Did it work? No. I mean, clearly there were a lot of problems, but I hesitate to vilify the effort.
And I want to remind our audience that you can tweet questions to us at #RaceForTruth. Eric, tell me, was it an experiment?
In a certain sense, the idea of having a particular section, in our case a subreddit, where people were trying to investigate this is yeah, I agree, it's not surprising, and we saw not just on Reddit, but you saw elsewhere people trying to speculate on all kinds of things, and we saw that happen not just in that one subreddit on our site, but elsewhere on our site as well. So yeah, I mean, it's also something that's very common online, where I guess the most maybe one of those common examples is that there'll be a video of someone getting mugged, or a video of someone abusing animals, and you'll have people kind of collectively try to figure out who it is, and often in like this situation, in a very dangerous sort of vigilante way. So yeah, it certainly was not surprising that would be something people would try to do.
Does that word vigilante make you nervous?
Yeah, and we only have like basically 6 rules on Reddit, and one of them is you can't post people's personal information. That includes names, that includes addresses, of course, links to Facebook, Twitter, that kind of thing. For that very reason.
Drew, I'm really interested. You have been observing these communities for a decade now. Is that too long? Am I stretching that out?
No, it's actually almost 15 years now.
Okay, so quite a long time. It seems to me like there's a mentality on these on many of these social sites of us versus them, where the users band together. And I saw it most frequently last week when users were discussing their efficiency with information versus the traditional media's efficiency with information. And so first of all, just tell me, do you see that as well, or would you describe it differently?
Yeah, I would describe it differently. It kind of runs the gamut. I mean, there's always the people who are the self-appointed experts on everything, who get stuff and want to be the people that are in the know and to be able to explain to people what's exactly going on. And on the other end of the spectrum, for the most part, the participatory issues we discussed earlier are kind of important to point out. That, I mean, at any given time on any website with comments, most people are not actually making comments, and a lot of them aren't even reading the comments if you want to get right down to it. It's a very small subset of people that are actually using the platform. So I don't know that it's really an us versus them in the sense that, you know, but it depends on where it's coming from. So, for example, I have a friend who's a conspiracy theorist, and he thinks that the media is holding back. I think that the media is not holding back enough. And so it's kind of hard to judge what the range is exactly between the us versus them thing. The one us versus them thing I am seeing, though, is this. I mean, Reddit is getting a lot of flack over the way this thing was handled, but why is Facebook not getting any crap about it? Why is Twitter not getting any crap about it? This doesn't make any sense to me. It seems like they've got some kind of an axe to grind here, because shouldn't all the other social media platforms, which behave relatively the same way, and I would argue that if you wanted to get right down to it, the other ones like 4chan and others probably cause more damage in the long run than anybody else, yet Reddit is the poster boy for this somehow. This doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. I want to put this up. I saw this on my Facebook feed. This I think photo was originally identified on Reddit, but I bet way more people saw it on Facebook than on Reddit. This was the supposed blue robe guy, and could you identify him? This is one of my friends who put this up, and I asked him about it, and I think he took it down fairly quickly. But anyway, it's an interesting. That's a great question. Why do you think that Facebook didn't get more grief, or Twitter didn't get more grief, but Reddit got so much grief?
Yeah, it does seem kind of strange to me, because honestly the lesson here isn't that internet communities can get out of control. It's that members of some internet communities can get out of control, and perhaps we should examine that behavior rather than the platform. Maybe the problem is that these people, you know, started calling around to check out who these people were, went out of their way to go over to their houses before anybody knew anything. Perhaps there should be articles written about that rather than attacking social media platforms, because it just doesn't make any sense to me.
But see,
that's
honestly,
the behavior we're trying to stop, I think.
To me, it does make a lot of sense why Reddit has gained the flack. I think precisely the dynamics about Reddit that make it such a powerful collaborative platform in its own unique way are exactly what drew the criticism, and that is the fact that there can be one space with one mission, and people come and flock to that mission, and every conversation about that mission is trapped on that page and begins to build and snowball on that page. So it's this illusion of extra agency, of more sort of power, and I think also the fact that, you know, Eric is here. You know, I don't know that we could get someone from Facebook or Twitter to even think like they have a voice in this conversation about what those platforms had to do with all of this. But Reddit does play something of a role, or at least is perceived to, because there are moderators. There are pages that are taken down, and these things happen more often than Facebook and Twitter, which tend to adopt a completely hands-off approach to what they're
until the AP gets hacked.
What? All right. I have a question from one of our Twitter followers, Bill Michael or Bill Mitchell? Bill Mitchell. Hey, Bill, how's it going? Bill is asking about other possibilities for crowdsourcing, like Place to Offer, which is a site for mobilizing people after traumatic events. Are any of you familiar with some of these other sites and the role that they play, and do you think they will become more significant in, I mean, we're obviously going to have more breaking news. It's inevitable.
I think the one that I liked a lot was Google's, what do they call that? The people locator service or whatever that they've rolled out a few times. I forget the name. Does anybody remember?
It's a people finder.
Yeah, that
Right.
one. That one's pretty cool. They've used that since, I think they started that in, 2005 during the tsunami?
Yeah, yeah. And so did you watch that last week at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we main paged the heck out of that one because that was something that people actually were using. So that I think that I would see the service like that making a difference in the future for sure.
All right. So let's broaden out for a minute. Drew and Eric, you both describe. I would like actually both of you to describe what you know about the users of your site. You must have some demographic information. And then Monica, I'd like you to come up with some questions about what you'd like to know about the users of Reddit and FARC. So, Eric?
Sure, yeah, so we actually know very, very little. We can tell you roughly 70% of the audience is in the US and Canada. That's about it. We don't require any personal information when people sign up. You can sign up with an email address, but you don't have to. So as far as demographic information, there's some third-party tools and studies out there like Nielsen that make guesses and guesses that seem in the right ballpark, but we don't actually collect any user data.
What are some of those guesses?
So anywhere between 65 and 70% male. And then age, the highest concentration of users are 20 to 34.
So, and the reason that I'm asking these questions is one of the things that we noticed with Facebook is as it went from being something for college kids to something that your grandparents are on, it changed the nature of Facebook. And so as user bases evolve, I think it's natural to expect that the platform will evolve, or at least portions of the platform. So, Drew, what do you know about your users?
Yeah, it's almost exclusively North American, and that has to do with the fact that FARC is sort of humor-centric, and humor is very cultural. I mean, people can't even understand British humor, and that's the same language. So, as a result, it's almost all North American. After that, the demographics that we see on ComScore claim that we're male-centric, but my experience on the in-person meetups that we do is it's over half women that show up to these things. I don't know what that means, but I kind of like it.
All right. Monica, questions for them?
Yeah, I guess I'm taking this in a different spin, but the number one question I have about Reddit users are they learning? And the main difference between Reddit today and so many other bigger social networks today is anonymity. So I've seen in the last couple days an interview with the user who created the Find Boston Bombers page, and of course he didn't want to reveal his name. So I think that's part of what bothers people, is that it's got some of that dynamic where people come together, they make a mistake, and maybe they apologize, but they apologize under a handle. So who's the real person behind the apology? And then many of them delete. And this happened on Twitter, this happened all over the place. People deleted posts that, yes, circulated, what turned out to be wrong information, but also covered up culpability and makes going back and taking stock of what happened very difficult. So that's one of my questions is how are Reddit users learning, and how accountable might they be for their actions, and what will they do next time? I want to hear from Eric. What do you think will happen next time something like this is replicated? Do you think things will go differently? Was that an experiment that failed and therefore will not happen again with Find Boston Bombers? Or will it just happen again because that's the community?
I mean, I think, in general we do see, communities learn, but in a very, in perhaps a very narrow set. So, and with very short memory in general. So I think, I think people will be more, I hope, but I also, based on things in the past, I think people will learn. I think, as Reddit has evolved, the sort of people who are running the individual smaller communities have sort of collectively created more and more and better tools, as have we. But the great thing about Reddit is that you can have a community, start, one day and days or weeks later become huge, almost like a huge site in and of itself. And so with that comes a lot of it comes a lot of different choices that the moderators and the individuals in the community have as well. So I mean, there's a lot of different different things that can be done in the future to try to try to mitigate some of the danger of just this type of information flying around.
And I want you to pay attention to the part of her question about responsibility or accountability. Is there a way to hold them accountable?
I mean, just like everything else on Reddit, I mean, people are anonymous, but they have they have sort of an identity on within that site or within that community. The same way people know each other on message boards and things like that. They may not know the person's real name, but it's a persona and an identity. So yes, it's certainly. I mean, that's one of the things that makes pseudo-anonymous communities great, is that it's not connected to your real life, so you can talk about politics or sports or whatever things related to your job that maybe you can't talk about in public, sort of on Facebook or Twitter where everyone can see it. But yes, it also makes that kind of accountability, it's not the same, but it also feels very different.
And I'll follow up real quick, because Reddit has so many levers, the 6 rules, the many rules on subreddits, the different powers that moderators have, and everything can be improved. What do you think could be improved? What levers could be changed so that next time, a platform that is as powerful as Reddit can definitely be, maybe shifts, somehow biases more of the action toward good than bad next time?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly technical things that can be done. There are also sort of messaging things that can be done to sort of just remind people of certain things to be careful of. But I think the more important tool for changing and improving these is just the knowledge of all of the people participating. So just having this horrible experience of innocent people's names being kind of floated out there will I think make people at least a little bit more careful next time, whether it's on Reddit or somewhere else. So and it makes any of the people who are moderating these communities more careful about how they are choosing to set up actions and rules. And we already saw this somewhat in this incident where people want to do something, so you better give them something that's 100% good and positive to do, or they're going to do things that are more dangerous. So trying to kind of channel some of that energy and activity into things that are clearly helpful.
Eric, how many moderators do you have on Reddit?
I don't know. I mean, we have thousands and even hundreds of thousands of different subreddits or communities, and each of those has multiple moderators.
So if I'm a Reddit member and I can create a subreddit and I'm the moderator, and I can designate other people the moderator if I choose to.
Correct.
Right, and tell me, how was the decision made to take the subreddit down, Find Boston Bombers?
Yeah, so the moderators, the people who created that community, chose to take it down. So they actually chose, I think at first they made it private, and then they kind of froze it in place, and then they made it completely private and essentially took it down. So that decision, was theirs.
Drew, what advice would you have for Eric?
Yeah, I think the problem is that again, we were talking about the us versus them mentality and the range of possible outcomes. I mean, when you have a site with hundreds of thousands of millions of people on it, and it only takes 10 people to make the wrong call, it's hard to discuss these things in sort of a general, is the community learning? Because what part of the community are we talking about? Are all of them learning? Well, 99.99% of them didn't do anything bad. The other small amount did. And in my opinion, like I said before, I think that the emphasis should not be on, is Reddit out of control, but what should people actually be doing in a situation where they think they might have identified somebody. Should they call the guy's house? Probably not. Should they call the FBI? I don't know. If that's your thing, sure. I mean, the whole point is that I think there should be more emphasis on how individuals should react, and because we're all tied into social media for better or for worse, be it Reddit or Facebook or Twitter or whatever. This is going to be a permanent part of our lives going forward, and I think a little bit of more information about how, not that what I see too many Reddit did bad and not enough these individuals did bad. You know, they shouldn't have tried to locate these people. They shouldn't have done this stuff. And by the way, all stuff that the New York Post did too, which may be why there's not as much discussion about it. I don't know.
Right, right. You know, that's a great transition because as I've been observing the changes that have been happening in media over the last, say, 5 years, one of the things that it's occurred to me is that we really live on a continuum now. We live on a continuum where some of us are paid professionally to create and distribute information, and other people do it sporadically, and some people do it quite constantly, but they're not paid for it. And some people are paid, but not necessarily as a paycheck. They get advertising from their YouTube channel or something like that. So we all exist on this continuum these days, and which I think. I mean, because I think the us versus them, the sort of the amateurs versus the professionals, I think that some of that comes from the professionals too. I think that a lot of professionals would wag their finger and say, "Look, see, you gotta leave it up to us. You people can't handle it," which is unfortunate too, because nothing is going to change, right? This continuum is only going to get more blurry and have less clear boundaries between who's a professional and who isn't, and who's good at this and who isn't. And so I want to talk about Monica in particular, since you are a professional journalist, but you probably have a much greater understanding and sympathy for the online social community than most professionals, I think. What do you think professionals can be doing to understand these communities better, and maybe even to partner with them?
Yeah, I think quite a lot, and I really couldn't agree more with what Drew was saying. Reddit does have levers, which is why I want to question them and ask, could they be better? But I think at the end of the day, this is absolutely about individuals and individual responsibility, and the people on the end of the continuum who may not, they're not professional journalists, maybe they didn't go to journalism school. I didn't go to journalism school. You learn by doing. That if there's one thing I've learned in my career is that you learn by doing, and guess what? Everybody's doing. So everybody's learning, I hope. Right. So what could professional journalists be doing to better understand that, I think, is understand that there's not that much difference at all between the professional journalist and the person who's doing it sporadically. Often professional journalists do their best work when they're driven and passionate and moved, and that's the same dynamic with the public. They learn by doing, but they're learning in this huge, sometimes chaotic stream where their emotions are driving them so far, and journalists understand that. We know, we've all made those kinds of assumptions and mistakes when a story is moving by so quickly and we just want to go out with something, and we need to exercise restraint. So understanding that all those things are not easy, and we don't have some kind of monopoly on them because we're paid to do this stuff. Restraint is hard when something is emotional. Discipline is difficult. Balancing being first with being right is difficult. And then and then proving your value and showing your value and how you share information is hard. So yeah, I think a lot of it is sympathy. A lot of it is understanding and maybe hopefully encouraging the right behaviors and holding people up as people who wield the same kind of power. So instead of looking down, look straight ahead at them and say, all right, we're in this together. Cool. Let's learn from each other. Let's figure it out. And let's understand that this is hard. Welcome to our world. Have fun. Let us show you around, and let's see what we can do.
Yeah, earlier on this broadcast, Aaron Brown from Arizona State University said adrenaline is not a journalistic tool. And I actually tweeted out that I disagree. I think adrenaline is a journalistic tool. At least it was for me. I was a police reporter for years, and even as a religion reporter, which was what I did after I was a police reporter, adrenaline fueled a lot of what I did. it can compromise some of your other journalistic values if you don't hold it in check. And I think that, like if you're ever tweeting a live event, you get that little surge of adrenaline when you hear the little nugget that you want to tweet, or you've got the clever comeback and you just can't get it out fast enough. That's that same, I mean, the urge to share information and to be part of the conversation is a significant part of all of us, and that's actually a democratic act when we do that. And so I think that urge is, I mean, that the existence of that emotion is a democratizing force because we all experience it. Eric, what do you wish that journalists knew about Reddit?
I mean, I would wish that that more people just used it for their own, and experienced it for their own personal interests, not necessarily related to the beat they're covering or their, professional interests. But if they're, Cleveland Browns fans, that they participated in the Cleveland Browns subreddit or whatever.
They still have those?
I think so.
Okay, I'll look that up.
And so, just to get if they're, and some of them are very familiar with Reddit and all kinds of other online communities, but for those that may not be as familiar, that they just get a more firsthand experience of how these things work and how the different sort of sub communities are created and cultivated, and some are better than others, and how they function.
Now, interestingly enough, I think that, you have identified yourself on Reddit. You're Huey Priest, and I do want you to eventually tell us what that moniker comes from. But like, I put my name on Reddit because I felt like anonymity was a bad idea for me. Monica, when you signed up, did you come up with a handle, or did you go on as Moni Guzman?
I actually have two. I have one that's an anonymous handle and one that is me. And the anonymous handle was an effort to understand because I had felt like I'd left anonymity behind, but going through Reddit and seeing what it could do, convinced me that anonymity can be an incredibly powerful thing. So I wanted to experience that as well. And I'm always conscious of what I do. I'm not going in there messing things around because that's just not who I am. But it's been a very cool experiment.
Right. But I think it's one of the issues that journalists need to consider is, should you ever be anonymous? And if you are, what you would do. And the fact that although the standard on Reddit is to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous. I'm on there as Kelly McBride, and I actually did an AMA recently, and I also noticed I've been on Reddit for a long time, even though I haven't used it very, very much until the last 2 years. But Eric, how many people seem to voluntarily identify themselves on Reddit?
I don't know. If I had to guess, I'd say probably 5%.
Small, yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, a lot of people are sort of known in their communities, in the different subreddits, and some people, their name is this, like myself, my handle on Reddit is the same as, on Twitter and, everywhere else.
And where did that come from?
I was working in college for a promotional, a company that made, coffee mugs and T-shirts and golf balls, sort of promotional products. And anytime they had to put a name on something, the name would be Huey Priest, and I have no idea why. That's just on all the samples, that was the name, and so I just started using that as an online handle. And I don't know if that was I don't know where that came from, but just kind of stuck back when I was starting to go online.
Yeah. Drew, what do you think journalists can learn from these communities?
Well, I think not a lot, and let me qualify that by saying not a lot, not from an informational standpoint, but there's really no secret to how social media works. It's exactly the same thing we've always done, sped up 1,000 times. There's no special sauce, there's no weird trick to it. It's literally the exact same thing you've always done, just a lot easier. And maybe if they learn that might clear up a lot of the confusion about how everything works.
Well, I would disagree. I think that the anonymity in some communities changes some things about the way social media works.
I've heard that. I think I disagree with it, but I'm not going to be borne out for another couple of years. This is based off of a mantra I heard being kicked around in journalism circles about how if you switch your comments over to Facebook, then when people have the real name attached to it, they're not likely to leave bad comments. I argue that that'll just transition in the people who don't mind leaving their name next to bad comments, and we haven't quite got there yet. But give it another couple of years, and they'll throw that one out too. I don't think that it really makes a lot of difference. But that's me.
All right. So how, as we move forward, and we're working on this continuum, how do you guys think citizens, and citizens in general, as well as citizens on social media, and I'm not sure that there's an exact distinction because most of us are on some form of social media, but what responsibility do you think citizens need to take on themselves as they think about consuming news and distributing news and producing news? Monica?
Yeah, I think when it comes to distributing news, and I know I'm a little radical in this, but I would love for every citizen to consider themselves a journalist. And there's one particular reason I think that's important. Because I think when we try to put barriers around the word journalist, or when somebody says, no, I'm not a journalist, I'm just putting this out there, what they're really talking about is responsibility. It is a synonym for responsibility. When somebody says, no, I'm not a journalist, they're saying, don't hold me responsible. And I say, that's not your place to say. If you are sharing critical information to a public that is listening and can be impacted by that information, you have that responsibility. And you're not the one who gets to tell us that you don't. And I think I want to see that go away. That ability to say, well, I'm not a journalist, so, when you listen to me, whatever, just know I'm not a journalist. I'm like, what? No. Why don't we instead all accept that we all wield this power, potentially at an equal level? Not all the time, but somebody on the street can be that witness and can be suddenly the most important source in a story. And it can happen to anyone at any time. I just don't want to see the word journalist being thrown around to throw off responsibility that we all have if we are all acting as information sharers.
Yeah, I would say that you're talking more about a democratic responsibility, which if you live in a democratic society, you bear whether or not you accept that responsibility. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that I think, that we all share the same responsibility. We do when we're talking about offline communities in the real world as well. I mean, we have a responsibility to, think about what we're saying, and a responsibility to think about the implications and ramifications of our actions, and responsibility to think about other people that we're interacting with in those communities. So it's much closer to the responsibilities we have in real life than I think it's often portrayed.
All right, thanks. Drew, what do you think?
I think Monica absolutely nailed it. That's exactly what needs to happen, is none of this I'm not a journalist stuff. It doesn't matter. If you're saying stuff that you can't prove, then either say, I can't prove this, here's what I think is going on, or just don't make the statement in the first place. Or, as I like to say, if you start uttering phrases like, I deny all wrongdoing, that's just like saying I'm guilty.
Yeah. I've got a question that I'm going to handle from Twitter here, but while I'm doing it, I want to give you guys a heads up because I want to give each of you a chance to ask someone else a question on this panel. So Eric, in particular, I'd love to see what kind of questions you have for Monica, and Drew, you can pick, and Monica, you can pick. So the question that we got from Twitter from Taylor is, what are the ethical considerations of journalists having multiple Reddit accounts? Can they interact, converse, contradict? And at first I was confused by this question, but the more I thought about it, I think this is actually a really interesting question. One of the things that I think is important as a journalist is that you not deceive other people. And so journalists have been, I think, tempted at times to create online personas to entrap people into doing stuff like you see it with To Catch a Predator. I've counseled journalists who were reporting on illegal trafficking of guns and thought about trying to create a personality to to buy guns from somebody. I've talked to journalists who were investigating a public official who they thought was inappropriately interacting with teenagers online. And I do think that as a journalist, you have a certain promise to not deceive. And I think you have to be careful of doing that with an anonymous personality. And in addition to that, I think you have to be wary of not manipulating either. It's very easy to use anonymity to make it appear as if there is some sort of force rising up or to stir something up. And I think that could be a little dangerous. So that was a good question, Taylor. All right, questions. Eric, what kind of questions do you have?
So one of my questions is what, for Monica is, on Reddit and, other places online, you see more of a cross-pollination between people from different cultures, different parts of the world, and also people from different sort of media environments. We have interactions on Reddit. In any popular thread, there's going to be people from many countries all over the world. And, what, impact, if any, you think that has on, the media itself, on the reporting and the stories that are being covered?
You mean, do you mean the fact that those spaces exist where there are powerful communities? What impact they're having?
No, I mean, I guess more so people from, from countries that have a very, free and open press and places that don't, and that have, different traditions in media and what's everyday.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly powerful impact. I mean, I'm still floored by the fact that, and I've heard this said over and over again, I think Drew hinted at this, to talk about Reddit as one singular entity is completely dumb, frankly. It's just dumb. It's not even just one space. Even the way that Twitter is in a way one space, Reddit is not one space. It is hundreds of thousands of different spaces. My husband is actually a really big Counter-Strike Global Offensive player. He's on the Counter-Strike Global Offensive subreddit every day, and the intimacy and power of that community is so much fun to watch, and I love it. So, but when you talk about different spaces, different things popping up, it's that ability to form a subreddit, tap into a passion, gather people around it, and this can happen anywhere in the world. The anonymity can be a force for good. It's just it can be a dangerous weapon as well, so we have to be careful. I like to think that if there is some way to cultivate a culture of responsibility among everyone, professional journalists, non-professional journalists, people who think of themselves as this or that or the other thing, but if we can all take more responsibility for the information we share, I think Reddit's a great space. I'm rambling, but I do think it's a great space. I think it's having great impact. I think it's funny when people in a subreddit start to comment, hey, I think journalists are looking at us, and they're kind of surprised. Like, I think there's journalists in here, and somebody wrote something where they quoted us, and that's a little weird. It's like a closed room, but it's open to everyone, and it's got the intimacy of a closed room, but it's open. And I think journalists would also do well to respect that. I've seen some sites just kind of grab from Reddit, sometimes without crediting, sometimes without. Those are tough issues, but these are people having fun with each other or sharing something they really care about in a more intimate and powerful way than I think on a lot of other platforms. So journalists would do well to, understand how that works. Maybe try to experience it yourself, and not be too much of a weird stalker outsider.
Yeah, Monica, I think another thing that journalists need to be aware of is being contextual with the information that they might discover on Reddit. Reddit, I mean, the diversity, Eric, that you talk about it's pretty amazing on Reddit, and you can find such political diversity, diversity of experience and viewpoint, and that's a journalistic value, right? We are always struggling as professional journalists to try and get more diverse voices into our content and into our work because that's a journalistic value. It's something that is really important as we try and reach the communities that we're trying to reach. So Reddit could offer a great window or tool or asset into bringing more diversity into your work. But I think you have to be respectful of the community and make sure that you're not taking stuff out of context. You know, you can ask, hey, you know, can we get together offline? You know, here's how you can find me offline. I'd love to include your viewpoint in my work in some way, or I'd love to brainstorm out a story idea with you. And I think that is, it's a great asset, but I think you have to be really, really aware of what the intention of the comments are. And I'm not saying like you can't use stuff that's on Reddit, because I think sometimes it's incredibly relevant and you should use stuff. But there needs to be a certain balancing act in that, and a certain transparency on the part of the journalist, because I think that transparency for professional journalism is becoming even more important, and that may be one of the biggest distinctions between the amateur crowd and the professional crowd is what level of transparency you voluntarily bring to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So, Drew, what question do you have?
Yeah, I was actually wondering, and actually this is to both Monica and Kelly, since this is an honest question I know the answer to. We were talking earlier about the responsibility of people to make sure that if they source information online that that it's accurate. And we were talking about accountability and like how would anybody hold anybody on Reddit accountable for this. What are the standards in journalism for accountability? Because it seems to me that especially the New York Post, but some other guys are kind of due for that. And I'm wondering, like, what exactly accountability happens at a journalism level? Because I just don't know. I know there is something, but I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, Monica, why don't you talk about what happens like internally in a shop, and I'll talk about some external systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what happens is you're out there with an identity and a role that you have embraced that says, I will do right, I will put out what is right, and you know, that is my job, and that is what you can expect from me, and that expectation is part of the role. So when you fail, when you fall down on that, you should expect and you should welcome a lot of anger. And the accountability comes from that. But I'll say this, overnight, during that night when things went crazy, and that first tweet went out saying that the wrong suspect's name came over the scanner, which turned out apparently not to be true. Many journalists retweeted that tweet. And I don't know that they felt the brunt of accountability that they might feel for making a more high-profile, I shouldn't say high-profile, a more visible mistake in a published story or something like that. So the journalists, I think some journalists were, you know, hidden in among the crowd, having made as big a mistake, but also having that diluted accountability. So it's an issue for everybody, and it's one reason I think personal responsibility is so important, because this accountability thing's not going to be perfect. It's not going to reach everyone all at once, but man, it hurt to see so many people just delete the tweets, you know. And I can't say for a fact that I know of any professional journalists who deleted their tweet. I wouldn't be surprised. It doesn't seem the right thing to do. It seems like we should stand up and fess up and say we'll do better next time. And so for everyone who didn't do that, journalist or not, don't do that again. Be better than that.
Yeah, I think that so there is internal accountability. You know, your boss can, you know, punish you. There's also an accountability through the courts. It wouldn't surprise me at all if somebody sues the New York Post. And in fact, many people are suggesting that somebody should sue the New York Post because that photo was, you know, the Bagman photo was absolutely irresponsible for a professional news organization. So many people are suggesting that. We have like 1.5 minutes left before I'm going to wrap. So Monica, you've got a question. What do you want to ask?
Oh man, I was thinking about this. I don't know that I have a really great one. I think it's for Eric. What do you think is most misunderstood about not just Reddit, but that entire space, and not just by journalists, but by everyone? What is the one thing you wish people would acknowledge? You've got 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean that people want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And I know a lot of people are aware of it, but what that means, I mean, the motivation behind wanting to be a part and to build something bigger. I think that's the real reason people are on Reddit and other places, not the follower count or the karma total or whatever, but they want to create something that's that's whether it's community or content that's bigger than themselves.
All right, thank you. I want to thank all three of you. You've all been very generous, Eric particularly. Thank you very much for agreeing to be a part of this. I want to thank Al Tompkins and Kenny Irby, our earlier hosts from Poynter, and their guests who gave generously of their time and were incredibly candid and honest. And I want to plug one training event coming up here at the Poynter Institute. The Poynter Reporters Academy is a 4-day seminar for reporters. It runs May 21st to May 24th, and the deadline for applications is April 30th. This is a training session that will be led by our dean, Stephen Buckley, Tom Wong from the Dallas Morning News, Jackie Banaszynski, fairly famous writing and editing expert from the University of Missouri, R.B. Brenner, who is currently at Stanford University but used to be at the Washington Post, and Alexandra Zayas from the Tampa Bay Times. So it's a star-studded cast of teachers, and you couldn't do better by yourself if you're interested in reporting to apply to that seminar. So thank you very much for being with us. This has been a great afternoon. This will be archived at poynter.org, and please send us any feedback. Bye. Bye, guys.
All right, thanks.